The days spent surviving on a deserted island with 9 beautiful women. After retiring from the military, Zhou Chuyu worked as a security guard on a luxury cruise ship. However, the ship encountered a storm at sea. Surviving the ordeal, Zhou Chuyu and a group of female streamers found themselves stranded on a deserted island. Using the survival skills he learned in the military, he led the group of female streamers on a challenging journey to survive on the island. Chapter 1: The Luxury Cruise Ship. On a luxury cruise ship, Zhou Chuyu stood on the deck in his security uniform, leisurely smoking a cigarette. He was originally a top soldier in the Special Forces, but during a mission, he disobeyed orders and nearly ended up in a military court after the mission concluded. Fortunately, due to his contributions over the years, his superiors decided against sending him to trial. However, he could no longer stay in the military and had to return home. To pay for his mother's heart bypass surgery, he almost exhausted all of his retirement funds, and to make a living, he took a job as a security guard on the cruise ship. But this security job was relatively easy. He just walked around the ship, earning around 4,000 to 5,000 yuan a month. At this moment, a group of female streamers was energetically live streaming on the deck. Zhou Chuyu, while smoking, watched them with interest. After all, 3 beautiful women are worth a look. Whenever a wealthy patron sent gifts to these streamers, they would pose flirtatiously and thank the patrons. Zhou Chuyu was used to this situation and couldn't help but lament how unfair society was. He only made a few thousand yuan a month while these streamers earned in an hour what he made in a year. He sighed inwardly about the injustice of it all but accepted that this was just how society worked. Occasionally, he would watch the live streams and had followed several streamers, but he never sent them gifts. He simply didn't have the extra money to spare. After watching for nearly half an hour, he shifted his gaze and began his patrol. He made his way around the ship and returned to the deck, intrigued by the streamers' playful antics. Just as he was engrossed in the show, a man in his 30s suddenly approached one of the female streamers. Before she could react, the man grabbed her and shouted, "You little bitch, give me my money back." He then slapped her hard across the face. Startled by the sudden assault, the streamer screamed, while the other female streamers stopped their broadcasts in fear, panicking and looking for a way to escape. The grabbed streamer struggled to break free, shouting, "Are you crazy? Let go of me." But the man held her tightly, demanding she return his money. As a security guard, Zhou Chuyu saw the two still grappling and immediately walked over, grabbing the man's arm and saying, "Let her go, we can talk this out." Though Zhou Chuyu had a grip on the man's arm, he refused to release the streamer and continued to yell for her to repay him. By now, a crowd had gathered, and 2 other security guards joined Zhou Chuyu in pulling the man aside. The frightened streamer retreated to a corner, her face pale. The man collapsed to the ground, crying loudly. It's rare to see a grown man sobbing like that, and the onlookers began whispering among themselves. Zhou Chuyu asked the man, "What's wrong with you? Why are you crying like this?" After sobbing for a moment, the man began to explain. It turned out he had been drawn in by the streamer during one of her live broadcasts and fell in love with her at first sight. Since then, he had always been present whenever she went live. Initially, he sent her small gifts, but over time, the amounts increased, and he even added her on WeChat. The streamer would send him messages to check in on him, leading him to believe she had feelings for him. He started sending more gifts, sometimes spending several thousand yuan a day. He tried to meet her in person, but she always gently declined. Over 6 months, he ended up sending her over 100,000 yuan, nearly all his savings. As his gift-giving dwindled, the streamer grew distant, eventually blocking him. That's when he realized he had been duped. Recently, upon hearing that the streamer would be live streaming on this cruise, he decided to follow her, leading to the earlier confrontation. After hearing his story, the crowd began to discuss among themselves. Most felt sympathy for him, blaming the streamer for being heartless, while some thought he brought it upon himself. Zhou Chuyu felt some sympathy for the man. After all, he had given all his savings to a woman he had never met. He was either foolish or hopelessly infatuated. Looking around the crowd, he noticed the streamer had vanished, leaving him to say to the man, "You need to let it go. There's no love on the internet. Besides, you were the one sending her money. Even if you took her to court, you wouldn't win. Just think of it as a lesson learned." After saying this, he left with the other 2 security guards. The middle-aged man sat there for a while before finally getting up and walking away. The crowd slowly dispersed. By the afternoon, Zhou Chuyu returned to the deck, leaning against the railing while smoking again. After the man's outburst, the streamer was no longer live streaming on the deck, but a few others were still hard at work. Suddenly, a strong wind picked up over the ocean, and the clear sky darkened with ominous clouds, signaling an approaching storm. The remaining streamers ended their broadcasts and rushed back to their cabins, while tourists on the deck also hurried inside for cover. Zhou Chuyu tossed his cigarette butt into the sea and headed inside as well. Soon, the storm raged over the water, causing the cruise ship to rock violently. Inside the cabin, the tourists believed the storm would pass quickly and continued chatting and laughing. After about 10 minutes, the storm intensified, and the ship swayed more violently. Items in the cabin fell to the ground as the ship rocked, and many tourists struggled to keep their balance. Panic set in, with some screaming and crying, turning the cabin into chaos. Chapter 2: Stranded on a Deserted Island. After a few more minutes, the cruise ship rocked even more violently. Zhou Chuyu furrowed his brow. He had experienced storms before, but none as fierce as this one. A sense of foreboding filled him. He quickly put on a life jacket, and seeing him do so, many others started searching for life jackets to wear. Just then, a massive wave slammed into the cruise ship, flooding the cabin with seawater. The glass above shattered, injuring several people with the flying shards. In an instant, the cabin was filled with cries for help, wails, and sobbing. Moments later, another colossal wave hit the ship, causing it to capsize. People inside the cabin panicked, scrambling for the exit. Zhou Chuyu, using his agility, rushed toward the deck. Before long, the cabin was filled with seawater, and the ship sank at a visible speed into the vast ocean. Perhaps driven by survival instinct, those who had made it to the deck jumped into the water. Zhou Chuyu hesitated for a moment but then dove in without a second thought. As he plunged into the ocean, the waves quickly engulfed him, and he swallowed a mouthful of seawater. When he surfaced, he was already several dozen meters away from the sinking ship. Fortunately, he was wearing a life jacket, which kept him from sinking. Before long, the entire cruise ship disappeared beneath the waves, taking with it those who hadn't managed to escape. Coughing up seawater, Zhou Chuyu drifted away with the current, losing track of time until the ocean finally calmed, and the storm clouds gradually dispersed. Floating on the surface with the help of his life jacket, he looked around and saw others like him, also floating on the water. The nearest person was only about 10 meters away, while others were several hundred meters distant. Staring at the endless ocean, Zhou Chuyu realized that if the rescue team didn't arrive soon, his chances of survival were slim. However, floating in the water left him powerless. All he could do was wait. He felt a deep sorrow at the thought of dying in this vast sea, leaving behind a mother who needed his care. The sense of loss and regret weighed heavily on his heart. Drifting on the water for several hours, he was now parched and exhausted, completely unsure of his location. Thankfully, his life jacket provided sufficient buoyancy, keeping him afloat and preventing him from sinking. As night fell, the sky darkened, and aside from the twinkling stars, he could see nothing else. Eventually, he could no longer keep his eyes open, and he drifted off to sleep on the surface. Fortunately, it was summer, and the water wasn't too cold. When he opened his eyes again, he found it was daylight, and the sunlight felt blinding. Looking around, he could vaguely see several people still floating in the water, but the closest ones were several hundred meters away. At that moment, he had no time or energy to worry about anyone else. All he could think about was whether he could hold on any longer. Several more hours passed, and Zhou Chuyu felt he barely had the strength to keep his eyes open. It seemed he was destined to perish in this ocean. After a while, he spotted what looked like an island in the distance, but it was too far to confirm. He drifted a little closer and finally realized it was indeed an island. Hope surged within him, and suddenly he found the strength to swim towards it. With determination, he paddled closer, and soon he could clearly see the tall trees on the island. But by then, he was completely exhausted. Even moving his arms felt like a monumental task. Just then, the wind shifted, pushing him away from the island. Seeing his chances of survival slipping away, a surge of primal energy erupted within him, and he forced himself to swim back toward the island. Just as he felt he might give out, he finally reached the shore, dragging his weary body onto the sand before collapsing into unconsciousness. Time passed, and eventually, he awoke again, slowly peeling off his life jacket and struggling to get to his feet. Looking around, he spotted some coconut trees not far away and unsteadily made his way toward them. When he reached the coconut trees, he saw many ripe coconuts scattered on the ground. Some were rotten and covered in ants and insects, but others had just fallen from the trees. Zhou Chuyu quickly picked up a few good ones and went to the shoreline, where he found a sharp rock. He began smashing the coconuts open. He was nearly exhausted, and normally, he could have smashed a coconut with his bare fists, but it took considerable effort to crack one open with the rock. He raised the coconut to his mouth and greedily drank the refreshing coconut water. With each sip, he felt nourishing energy flooding into his body. After finishing one coconut, he opened another and continued drinking. After consuming 4 or 5 coconuts, he felt a bit of his strength returning. He smashed the empty coconuts to extract the meat, shoving it into his mouth and wolfing it down. After eating the coconut meat, he rested on the beach for a while, feeling rejuvenated enough to get back on his feet and search along the shore, hoping to find other survivors or useful resources. He walked along the coast for about 300 to 400 meters when he spotted someone lying on the ground. The bright red life jacket made them stand out. Lying motionless, it was unclear whether they were alive or dead. Zhou Chuyu quickened his pace and approached the person, discovering it was a young woman who looked to be in her 20s. He recognized her. She was a streamer named Shalazi, someone he followed and occasionally watched live streams of, but he had never interacted with her since he couldn't afford to send her gifts. Chapter 3, Song Yushi. Zhou Chuyu immediately knelt down and placed a finger under her nose to check for breath. He found a faint breath. It seemed she had choked on seawater. He then placed both hands on her chest and began performing chest compressions. As he continued, the girl suddenly coughed up several mouthfuls of seawater and slowly began to regain consciousness. When she opened her eyes and saw Zhou Chuyu pressing on her chest, she mistook it for something inappropriate and slapped him hard across the face. She exclaimed, "You pervert! What are you doing? Do you want me to call the police on you?" Perhaps due to her weakened state, her slap felt more like a gentle poke. Seeing that she was awake, Zhou Chuyu quickly withdrew his hands, stood up, and said, "Ungrateful. I saved your life, and you hit me instead." With that, he turned away and walked off. The girl paused, stunned by his words. It dawned on her that he had just rescued her. She scanned her surroundings and realized she was on a deserted island. Seeing Zhou Chuyu walking away several meters, she struggled to sit up from the sand and called out weakly, "Hey! Wait! Where are we? I didn't know you were saving me. I thought you were taking advantage of me." Seeing Zhou Chuyu ignore her, she was filled with frustration, muttering, "What kind of person is this? So arrogant." She tried to stand again, but her weakened body caused her to slump back down on the sand. Zhou Chuyu continued along the shoreline and soon spotted 2 bodies lying on the beach not far away. He hurried over to them. When he reached the 2, he saw they had begun to bloat. It was clear they were lifeless. He stripped them of their life jackets and clothes before tossing their bodies into the sea. After walking a bit further without seeing any other survivors, he turned around and headed back toward the coconut trees, finding the girl he had just saved still sitting on the sand, crying softly. Zhou Chuyu approached her and said, "Why are you still here? Do you want to get baked by the sun? Can't you find some shade?" Upon hearing his words, the girl cried even louder, replying, "Who told you to ignore me? Do you think I want to be sunbaked? I just don't have the strength to stand. Can you help me?" Considering her plea, Zhou Chuyu thought for a moment and placed the clothes and life jacket he had taken from the bodies on the sand, then reached out to help her up. He assisted her to a large tree near the coast and helped her sit down. Suddenly, the girl turned to him and said, "Can you find me something to eat? I'm so thirsty and hungry. Once we get out of here, I'll repay you." Zhou Chuyu didn't respond to her request but headed toward the coconut trees, picking up a few coconuts that had just fallen to the ground. He returned to the girl with the coconuts in hand. When she saw him approach with the coconuts, her eyes lit up. She had thought Zhou Chuyu was going to leave her behind, not realizing he was fetching coconuts for her. Reaching her, Zhou Chuyu tossed a coconut onto the ground, then found a sharp stone at the shoreline to crack one open for her. He handed it to her, saying, "Shalazi, drink up. I didn't expect such a big streamer to end up like this." Surprised, she paused before taking the coconut and tilting her head back to drink the coconut water. After finishing, she looked at Zhou Chuyu, who then cracked open another coconut for her. After she drank the coconut water, she asked, "How did you know my name is Shalazi?" Zhou Chuyu smiled and replied, "I'm also a fan of yours and often watch your live streams. It's not strange that I know you." The girl then asked, "What is your name?" Zhou Chuyu laughed and said, "If I tell you, you won't know me anyway. I'm just a security guard who can't even afford to give you gifts. You only know those wealthy guys." She looked at his security uniform and retorted, "I meant what is your name, not your online alias." Zhou Chuyu chuckled again and said, I thought you meant my online name. I'm Zhou Chuyu, a proud security guard on the cruise ship. Upon hearing this, she smiled and said, I'm Yushi. Thank you for saving me. Once I get back, I'll make sure to repay you. By the way, where are we? Zhou Chuyu sighed and replied, how would I know where this is? It should be a deserted island. You should rest under this tree while I see if I can find something to eat at the shore. With that, he walked toward the shoreline, where he began searching. After some time, he finally found some clams clinging to the rocks. Using a sharp stone, he pried some off and wrapped them in his shirt. He returned to the big tree, tossing the clams onto the ground, and then collected some dried grass and wood from the nearby forest. Next, he searched for a piece of driftwood washed ashore and a sharp stone. He drilled a small hole in the wood, then found a dry, sturdy stick in the woods. Back at the tree, he sharpened one end of the stick on the stone while Yushi watched curiously, clearly doubtful he could really create fire by drilling wood. Zhou Chuyu squatted down, pressing one end of the stick against the wood block, and began rubbing it rapidly. His arms moved back and forth, accumulating force as the stick and wood made a creaking sound. As time passed, the heat generated from the friction built up. Zhou Chuyu's forehead beaded with sweat, and his palms were sore and bleeding from the friction, but his eyes remained determined and hopeful. After more than 10 minutes, a small wisp of smoke rose from the wood. He quickly grabbed the wood, poured the powder into the dried grass, and leaned in to blow gently, while Yushi held her breath in anticipation. Before long, wisps of smoke began to rise from the grass. After a few more seconds, a small flame suddenly flickered to life. Zhou Chuyu quickly placed the burning grass on the ground and added some small twigs to it. As the fire grew, he added larger sticks until a roaring fire was blazing. Seeing Zhou Chuyu successfully start the fire, Yushi was amazed and impressed, her eyes filled with admiration. She exclaimed, I didn't expect you to be so skilled at starting a fire by drilling wood. Zhou Chuyu smiled and said, it's nothing, it's child's play for me. With that, he pulled some burning charcoal from the fire and placed the clams on top to roast. Chapter for the first night on the island. After about 10 minutes, the clams on the fire were already roasted. Zhou Chuyu picked up one, broke the shell, put it in his mouth and started eating. Yushi was hesitant to reach out for it. Zhou Chuyu said to her, eat it quickly. Why are you still standing there? Yushi said shyly. Can this thing be eaten? Can I not eat it? It looks scary. Zhou Chuyu said without raising his head. It's up to you. If you want to starve to death, you don't have to eat it. This is not your home. You can't be picky. Maybe in 2 days, there will be no clams to eat. After hearing him say this, although Yushi was very reluctant to eat the clams, if she wanted to survive here, she could only eat the clams. He picked up a roasted clam, cracked the shell, put it in his mouth and took a bite. However, the roasted clam did not have any seasoning and tasted fishy. Yushi almost vomited after taking a bite, but still swallowed it down while resisting the nausea. Zhou Chuyu was not so particular and ate one after another. He knew that if he wanted to survive here, he had to maintain his physical strength. After eating the roasted clams, Zhou Chuyu came to the coast, took the clothes and pants he had just taken off the 2 corpses, took them to the coast and started washing them. After a simple wash, they came to the big tree and hung them directly on the branches to dry. Yushi couldn't help asking again. Where did you get these clothes and pants? Zhou Chuyu said expressionlessly. I just took them off the body on the coast. Hearing that the clothes and pants were actually taken off the body, Yushi said with some disgust. Why do you even want the clothes of the dead? Zhou Chuyu glanced at her and said. Anyway, they are all dead, and these clothes are useless to them. Don't forget that this is a deserted island. We must make good use of anything that is useful to us. Yushi said disapprovingly. Is it as serious as you said? I think the rescue team will find us in 2 or 3 days at most, and then we can leave here. Hearing her say this, Zhou Chuyu smiled and said. I hope it will be like you said. After hanging the clothes, she went to the coconut tree to pick up some coconuts that had just fallen and took them back to the big tree, and picked up some firewood in the woods. As it was getting dark, Zhou Chuyu came to the coast again and smashed some clams with stones, took them under a big tree, put them on the fire and roasted them. Unable to bear the fishy smell of the clams, Yushi didn't eat any of them when they were roasted. She just smashed a coconut with a stone and drank the coconut juice inside, then smashed the coconut that had been drained of coconut juice, picked out the coconut meat inside and ate it. Zhou Chuyu just shook his head helplessly when he saw this, thinking that he would see if you were too hungry to eat in 2 days. After eating, it was completely dark. There might be large carnivores on this deserted island at night. For the safety of the two, Zhou Chuyu took some firewood and lit several fires around. She picked up some fallen leaves from the ground and spread them under the tree, and said to Song Yushi, "If you are sleepy, lie down and rest. I will keep watch." Hearing Zhou Chuyu say this, Song Yushi took another look at the coconut leaves spread on the ground and said with some disdain, "You want me to sleep on these leaves? Can I sleep here?" Hearing her say this, Zhou Chuyu was immediately furious and said to her, "Do you want me to find you another Simmons bed? If you don't want to sleep, you can sit with me." Song Yushi felt wronged immediately, but still lay on the leaves to sleep, while Zhou Chuyu stayed by the fire and added some firewood to several fires from time to time. It was like this until dawn, and I felt that I couldn't open my eyes. I thought it was almost dawn, and there shouldn't be any danger, so I lay on the ground and fell asleep. When the sun rose, Song Yushi woke up. She looked at Zhou Chuyu, who was still sleeping, with some disdain. She felt that her stomach was growling with hunger. Fortunately, there were some coconuts that Zhou Chuyu picked up yesterday under the tree. She took 2 coconuts to the coast, found a stone and started to smash them. Perhaps because she was too weak, she almost smashed her hand several times. It took more than 10 minutes to crack a coconut. She put the coconut to her mouth, raised her head and drank the coconut juice inside in one breath. She smashed the coconut again, took out the coconut meat inside and stuffed it into her mouth and ate it voraciously. But this little coconut juice and coconut meat were not enough to fill her up. She felt sore and weak all over, and she could hardly stand. She could only sit down under the big tree. It was not until noon that Zhou Chuyu woke up. He looked at Song Yushi sitting under the tree and did not talk to her. She stood up and went to the coast to wash her face with sea water, then smashed some clams from the cracks of the reef with a stone, took them under the big tree and dug out some charcoal from the fire, and directly put the clams on the fire and started roasting. Song Yushi looked at Zhou Chuyu roasting clams again, and couldn't help but said to him, Can you find something else to eat? These clams are really hard to swallow. Don't worry, I won't let you find it in vain. I can give you money when you leave here." Hearing her say this, Zhou Chuyu couldn't help but smile and said, "Do you have a lot of money?" Song Yushi didn't hear that Zhou Chuyu's words were a bit sarcastic, and said with a smug look, "I do have 120 million. As long as you find something to eat for me, I can give you 100,000 yuan. Hearing her say that she had 120 million, Zhou Chuyu was also shocked, thinking that being a host is still quite profitable. Even if he works for a lifetime, he can't make so much money. Then he said to her, "There are clams and coconuts here, do you like to eat them?" After that, he started to grill clams by himself. Seeing him like this, Song Yushi thought that she gave him too little money, and said to him again, "Don't be too greedy, 100,000 is not a small amount, even a security guard like you may not make that much in a year." Hearing Song Yushi say this, Zhou Chuyu was immediately furious, raised his head and said to her coldly, "What's wrong with me being a security guard? Is it embarrassing or annoying? What does it have to do with you how much money I make? Don't think you are great just because you have a few stinky money. Anyway, there are only clams and coconuts here, you can eat if you want to, and continue to starve if you don't want to eat." Hearing Zhou Chuyu say this, Song Yushi didn't dare to speak for a while, but her face was full of grievances. Zhou Chuyu didn't indulge her. When the clams were grilled, she took them up and started eating. At this time, Song Yushi was so hungry that she couldn't stand it anymore. She picked up a baked clam, broke the shell, stuffed it into her mouth, suppressed her nausea and swallowed it directly. Chapter 5 Lesson for Carelessness. After eating the roasted clams, Zhou Chuyu smashed a coconut with a stone and placed it in front of Song Yushi's feet. He also smashed one and raised his head to drink the coconut juice in one breath. He stood up and walked towards the coast. Seeing this, Song Yushi hurriedly said to him, "What are you going to do?" Zhou Chuyu said without turning his head, "I'm going to the coast to see if I can find any usable supplies, and by the way, see if there are any other survivors. You stay here." Hearing this, Song Yushi hurriedly stood up and said, "I'm scared to stay here alone, I'd better go with you." After that, he quickly caught up with Zhou Chuyu, and the two of them searched along the coast. They walked a long way, but except for some garbage washed ashore by the sea, they didn't see any other usable supplies. Zhou Chuyu could only find some relatively clean empty bottles, cleaned them with seawater, and found a nylon rope on the coast. He tied up these clean empty bottles and hung them around his neck. When Yushi saw him picking up so many empty bottles, she couldn't help but feel a little disgusted. The two walked along the coast for a while, and saw people on the beach in the distance. Yushi quickened her pace and walked towards those people. Zhou Chuyu walked over slowly. When Zhou Chuyu walked in front of the group of people, he could see their appearance clearly. There were two acquaintances among them, one was Ma Hu, the captain of his security team, and the other was Liu Hainan, the captain of the cruise ship. The rest were tourists on the cruise ship. At this time, Yushi was chatting with a girl, who was also a famous anchor. Zhou Chuyu would often watch her live broadcast. He only knew that her online name was Gentle Chichi, but he didn't know what her real name was. There was another girl who was also a host, the one who was grabbed by the middle-aged man on the deck of the cruise ship, and the others were both men and women. When seeing Zhou Chuyu appear, Ma Hu and Liu Hainan were also a little surprised. Ma Hu said to Zhou Chuyu in a leadership tone, "Damn, Xiao Zhu didn't expect you to be alive." Hearing him say this, Zhou Chuyu said with a smile, "You are not dead yet, I must be alive." Hearing Zhou Chuyu say this, Ma Hu suddenly felt a little embarrassed. He didn't expect Zhou Chuyu, who usually said yes to him, to speak to him like this. In fact, it's not Zhou Chuyu's fault that he spoke unpleasantly. The main reason is that Ma Hu is the brother-in-law of Captain Liu Hainan, so he got a security captain on the cruise ship. Usually, he made things difficult for his subordinates. Every month, he asked his security guards to give him tribute. If it weren't for keeping this job, Zhou Chuyu would have beaten him up long ago. At this time, he heard Zhou Chuyu actually talking to him in front of so many people, and he was immediately furious. He strode to Zhou Chuyu and said to him in a loud voice, "I say, Xiao Zhu, how can you talk to the leader like this? Don't you want this job?" Hearing him say this, Zhou Chuyu couldn't help but sneered and said to him, "Do you think this is still on the cruise ship? Don't talk to me so loudly, be careful, I will beat you up." Hearing Zhou Chuyu say this, Ma Hu couldn't help but laugh, and said to him with some contempt, "You want to beat me with your small body, do you think I am the security captain for nothing? Even if there are 4 or 5 people like you, they can knock you down in minutes." It's no wonder that Ma Hu dared to talk to Zhou Chuyu like this. Zhou Chuyu is only 1.7 meters tall and looks a little fragile, while Ma Hu is 1.9 meters tall, with big shoulders and a big waist, looking like a small bulldozer. At this time, Liu Hainan also came over and said to Zhou Chuyu with some contempt, "Xiao Zhu, you should apologize to Xiao Hu and give in. Otherwise, he will really hit you. I'm afraid your small body can't bear it." Zhou Chuyu smiled and said, "It's just a daydream for me to give in to him. If he dares to touch me, I've wanted to beat him up for a long time." Hearing Zhou Chuyu say this, Ma Hu immediately clenched his fist and squeaked. He clenched his fist as big as a casserole and smashed it towards Zhou Chuyu's head. Everyone present thought that Zhou Chuyu would definitely suffer this time. Unexpectedly, Ma Hu's fist stopped when it was more than 10 centimeters away from Zhou Chuyu's head. It turned out that Zhou Chuyu stretched out a hand and grabbed his arm. At this time, Ma Hu felt that his arm was locked by an iron chain and couldn't move at all. He didn't expect that Zhou Chuyu, who looked weak, would have such great strength. He tried hard to break free from his arm. But he couldn't break free no matter how hard he tried. Zhou Chuyu grabbed the clothes on his shoulders and threw Ma Hu 2 or 3 meters away with an over-the-shoulder throw. Ma Hu's huge body slammed into the beach, making a big hole in the beach, and a lot of sand went into his mouth. Everyone present opened their mouths wide and looked at Zhou Chuyu in disbelief. No one expected that he would have such means. Even Liu Hainan was surprised. He knew that although his cousin relied on his connections to become a security captain, he knew that his cousin was a good fighter. 3 or 4 ordinary gangsters were not his opponents. He didn't expect that he would be easily controlled by Zhou Chuyu at this time. Ma Hu thought that he was tricked by Zhou Chuyu because of his carelessness. He climbed up from the beach, spit out the sand in his mouth, and said to Zhou Chuyu, "You forced me to do this. Don't blame me for being too ruthless." After saying that, he clenched his fist and rushed towards Zhou Chuyu. Unexpectedly, as soon as he rushed to Zhou Chuyu, he flew 3 or 4 meters away like a cannonball and fell hard on the beach again. No one saw how Zhou Chuyu made the move. It turned out that when Ma Hu was about to rush to Zhou Chuyu quickly kicked Ma Hu in the stomach. Zhou Chuyu used all his strength to kick Ma Hu 3 or 4 meters away. At this time, Ma Hu felt as if his whole body was falling apart, and his stomach was also burning with pain. He struggled for a long time before climbing up from the beach. At this time, he no longer dared to attack Zhou Chuyu. He just stared at him fiercely, and Zhou Chuyu ignored him. In order to ease the embarrassment, Liu Hainan immediately stood up and said to everyone, "Since we all survived the disaster and drifted to this deserted island, it means that we are destined to be together. We should unite as one and wait for the arrival of the rescue team instead of fighting among ourselves." When he said this, he glanced at Zhou Chuyu intentionally or unintentionally. In fact, he said this to Zhou Chuyu. When others heard him say this, they all agreed that he was right. After all, he was also the captain of the cruise ship and had a certain prestige in everyone's hearts. Zhou Chuyu was a little disdainful of what he said. "Why didn't you say this when your cousin wanted to beat me just now? Now that your cousin is at a disadvantage, you jump out and say this." Chapter 6 Take Ding Shui away. Hearing that everyone agreed with him, Liu Hainan struck while the iron was hot and said, "We don't know when the rescue team will be able to find this place. Since we are trapped here, we should choose a leader to lead everyone to survive here, and this leader must have certain experience in surviving in the wild. Don't you think so?" Hearing him say this, the group of people began to echo him again, saying that what he said made sense. Only Zhou Chuyu stood there without saying a word. Hearing that everyone agreed with his opinion, Liu Hainan continued to say, "Since everyone agrees with my proposal, let's elect a leader as soon as possible and gather everyone's supplies together for unified distribution." As soon as he finished speaking, a bald man stood up and said, "I think Captain Liu should be the leader. After all, he is the captain of the cruise ship and has experience in surviving in the wild. What do you think?" Hearing him say this, everyone except Zhou Chuyu agreed to let him be the leader. Seeing that everyone elected him as the leader, Liu Hainan was immediately delighted. He glanced at Zhou Chuyu, who had been silent, and said to him, "Xiao Zhu, what do you think of me being the leader?" Zhou Chuyu said expressionlessly, "Since they all elected you to be the leader, you can just be the leader. Anyway, I'm used to being alone. It doesn't matter whether you are the leader or not. This leader has no influence on me." Hearing Zhou Chuyu say this, Liu Hainan's face suddenly changed, and he said to him coldly, "I heard that you mean to leave us and live alone. I admit that you are quite skilled, but don't forget that this is on a deserted island. Even if you are very powerful, it is difficult for you to live here alone. You have to think about it." Zhou Chuyu said with a smile, "You don't have to worry about my life or death." Hearing that Zhou Chuyu was determined to live alone, Liu Hainan didn't say anything else. He just looked at him coldly and said to a group of people, "Since you all chose me as the leader, please take out all the things you have visited and put them here for me to distribute to everyone." Hearing Liu Hainan say this, the group of people also walked into the woods one after another. Soon, everyone came out of the woods with something in their hands and put it on the ground at Liu Hainan's feet. It must be said that this group of people hid a lot of things, including some bottled mineral water and food, some medicines, some cigarettes, and a few lighters. Seeing that everyone had taken out the things, Liu Hainan winked at Ma Hu, and Ma Hu quickly walked into the woods. Not long after, he took out a sharper knife and an axe, as well as a whole box of mineral water and some compressed biscuits. Seeing that this group of people actually brought so many things to this deserted island, Zhou Chuyu was also surprised. It seems that this group of people also has certain skills. Little did he know that these things were placed in the suitcase and drifted here with the sea water, and were salvaged by this group of people, but Zhou Chuyu did not have their good luck. His eyes only stayed on these foods for a while, and then focused on the knife and axe. He glanced at the cigarettes again, thinking that he had to find a way to get these things, so that he could survive here well. Although he was quite skilled and could have just gone and robbed it, he was too disdainful to do so. Liu Hainan also saw Zhou Chuyu staring at the things under his feet, and said with some pride, "Xiao Zhu, what do you think? We have so many supplies now, enough to live until the rescue team arrives. If you regret it now, it's not too late. Just beg me and apologize to Xiao Hu, and I will agree to let you stay." Hearing him say this, Zhou Chuyu raised his head and looked at him fiercely. Liu Hainan felt a little scared when Zhou Chuyu looked at him like this, as if he was being held back by a poisonous snake. He didn't dare to look directly at Zhou Chuyu and quickly lowered his head. At this time, Zhou Chuyu slowly spoke. "You are a fool. It is a daydream for you to ask me to beg you. I just hope you will not beg me in the future. Although he was a little afraid of Zhou Chuyu, Liu Hainan still raised his head and looked at him and laughed when he heard him say this. Don't you see the current situation? I will beg you. Since you are so stubborn, please leave here. We don't welcome you. Hearing Liu Hainan say this, many people also shouted for him to leave here. Song Yushi was a little reluctant. After all, he saved her life. Then she walked up to him and said to him, just give in to him and stay here. I admit that you are quite powerful, but if you leave us, it will be hard for you to survive here. Hearing her say this, Zhou Chuyu said with a smile. Thank you for your concern. As for whether I can survive here, you don't have to worry about it. After saying that, she turned around and left. Seeing him leave, Marhu said angrily. I wonder how long you can be so proud. Before Zhou Chuyu walked out for long, a girl suddenly ran out of the crowd, quickly chased Zhou Chuyu, and said to him with a smile. I want to leave with you. I wonder if you are willing to take me with you. At this time, Zhou Chuyu stopped and looked at the girl. Zhou Chuyu also knew this girl. She was a waitress on the cruise ship. At this time, she was still wearing a set of work clothes. Zhou Chuyu often saw her on the cruise ship, but they hardly said anything. Hearing that she wanted to leave with him, Zhou Chuyu said to her with interest. Why do you choose to leave here with me? You know, I have nothing. Isn't it good for you to be with them? Hearing him ask this, the girl said shyly. I just feel that you can take me here to survive. Hearing her say this, Zhou Chuyu couldn't help but laugh. At this time, Marhu said loudly to the girl. Ding Shui, are you sure you want to leave here with him? Think about it, don't come back to beg me to take you in. The girl named Ding Shui glanced at Marhu and said loudly. I have thought about it, I choose to leave here with him. Don't worry, I will not come back to beg you even if I starve to death here. Hearing Ding Shui say this, Marhu was so angry that his teeth itched. You know, he has been courting Ding Shui for a long time. When he was on the cruise ship, he always approached Ding Shui for various reasons, but Ding Shui had no feelings for him at all, and she especially hated him. Zhou Chuyu and Ding Shui walked along the coast towards their fire. After walking for a while, Zhou Chuyu said to her. You look like you hate Marhu. Ding Shui nodded and said. Marhu often harassed me on the cruise ship. If I lived with them, I don't know what he would do to me. This is why I must leave them. Hearing her say this, Zhou Chuyu couldn't help but smile and said. I didn't expect that Marhu actually had such a hobby. It seems that I was too gentle just now. I should have crippled him earlier. It seems that those girls will have a hard time in the future. Chapter 7 Hiding Coconuts. When the two returned to the big tree, they saw that the firewood in the fire had burned down to only some charcoal, which was still emitting a little flame. Zhou Chuyu immediately took some more firewood and put it on the fire. He put his mouth close to it and blew hard for a while before the firewood burned again. Ding Shui couldn't help swallowing her saliva when she saw the coconut under the tree, and said to Zhou Chuyu. Brother Zhou, where did you get this coconut? Can I have one? Zhou Chuyu immediately picked up a coconut and smashed it with a stone and handed it to her. Ding Shui took the coconut handed by Zhou Chuyu and said, thank you, to him. Then she put the coconut to her mouth and greedily drank the coconut juice inside. At this time, Zhou Chuyu seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly stood up and walked towards the coast. Seeing this, Ding Shui immediately stood up and chased Zhou Chuyu while holding the coconut. When he caught up with Zhou Chuyu, he quickly said, Brother Zhou, why are you in such a hurry? Zhou Chuyu said to him as he walked, I have to pick the coconuts from the coconut trees and hide them, otherwise it will be bad if Liu Hainan and the others find them. Ding Shui asked puzzledly, why do you hide the coconuts? Isn't it too selfish to do so? Even if they find them, it won't matter. Zhou Chuyu shook his head and said to her, you don't know how precious coconuts are on this deserted island. I was thinking of using coconuts to exchange something for Liu Hainan and the others. To tell you the truth, I don't know when the rescue team will find this place. If we want to survive here, we must first store more supplies. I am not doing this selfishly but for survival. Do you understand? Hearing him say this, Ding Shui nodded and said, Brother Zhou, I understand. In less than half an hour, the two came under the coconut tree, and Zhou Chuyu asked Ding Shui to collect the coconuts that fell on the ground. I came to the coast, found a fist-sized stone and put it in my pocket. I came to the coconut tree, spit into my palm, hugged the coconut tree with both hands and climbed up. Seeing Zhou Chuyu climbing the almost bare coconut tree with his bare hands, Ding Shui was surprised again. She didn't expect him to be so powerful. The main reason why she chose to leave with him was that she didn't want to be harassed by Marhu. Now it seems that she made the right choice to leave with him. In less than 2 minutes, Zhou Chuyu had climbed up the coconut tree more than 10 meters high, clamped the bare trunk tightly with his feet, freed one hand to take the stone out of his pocket, and smashed it at the connection between the coconut and the trunk. In less than 2 minutes, a bunch of coconuts fell to the ground, and Zhou Chuyu threw the stone in his hand to the ground, hugged the coconut tree with both hands, loosened his feet and slid under the tree. Picking up the stones on the ground and putting them in their pockets, they walked towards another coconut tree. It took more than an hour to finally knock down all the coconuts on the coconut trees. Including the ones Ding Shui picked up on the ground, there were hundreds of them. The two carried these coconuts into the woods and dug several deep pits to bury them. After burying the coconuts, Zhou Chuyu said to Ding Shui again, "Don't tell others where you hide these coconuts. This is the guarantee for our survival here in the future." Ding Shui also hurriedly promised not to tell others where the coconuts were hidden. The two returned to the big tree. Zhou Chuyu asked Ding Shui to rest under the big tree, and he went to the woods to pick up some firewood, tied it with tree bark and carried it back to the tree. He came to the coast again, stood on a reef and began to observe. He also knew that eating grilled clams every day was not a solution, and he had to find some other food to supplement his nutrition. The sea water was clear and there were many fish swimming around on the bottom of the sea. However, without any fishing tools, it was almost impossible to catch these fish. I saw lobsters in the cracks of the reefs on the bottom of the sea. I was delighted. I took a sharp stone and went to the woods. I found a small tree as thick as my arm and started smashing it with the stone. After much effort, I finally broke the tree in half and trimmed the branches and leaves on it. I took the trunk to the fire and put one end on the fire to burn it. Then I came to the coast and hugged a big stone and came under the tree. Ding Shui asked in confusion, "Brother Zhu, what are you doing?" Zhou Chuyu said with a smile, "I see there are many lobsters in the cracks of the reefs. I want to make a harpoon and get some to eat." When she heard that she could eat lobsters, Ding Shui couldn't help swallowing her saliva again. Seeing that the stick in the fire had caught fire, Zhou Chuyu immediately took out the stick, put it on the stone and began to grind it. It took almost half an hour to finally grind one end of the stick to a very sharp edge, and took the polished stick to the reef on the coast. He stripped himself down to a pair of shorts, carefully went into the sea, took a deep breath, and dived into the seabed. Sure enough, he saw the lobster hiding in the gap. He picked up the stick and stabbed it hard. The lobster was stabbed through and immediately floated to the surface. He pulled the lobster off the stick and threw it directly on the beach on the coast. It took more than an hour to finally catch 7 or 8 lobsters. Each lobster weighed 4 or 5 taels. So many lobsters were enough for 2 people to have a full meal. After climbing onto the reef, putting on their reef clothes, they returned to the tree. Seeing that Zhou Chuyu had brought back so many lobsters, Ding Shui was also very happy and said to him with a smile, "Brother Zhu, you are so amazing." Zhou Chuyu did not speak, but pulled out some charcoal from the fire and roasted the lobsters directly on it. In less than 20 minutes, the lobsters were roasted. The two of them did not care about the hotness, picked up the roasted lobsters, peeled off the shells and stuffed them into their mouths and ate them voraciously. Each of them ate 4 big lobsters at this meal, and they both felt extremely satisfied and happy. After eating the lobsters, Zhou Chuyu took Ding Shui to the woods again, picked up some thicker dead trees, and carried them back to the tree. They smashed some palm leaves in the woods with stones, and collected some bark to use as ropes. After returning to the tree, the two began to build a simple shelter. It was almost dark, and they finally built a simple shelter under the tree. As for the roof, it was covered with a thick layer of palm leaves. To prevent leaks, the two found some foam and plastic bags on the coast to cover the palm leaves on the roof. To prevent being blown away by the strong wind, some stones were pressed on it. Zhou Chuyu came to the reef on the coast again, smashed some clams with stones, returned to the big tree, put them on the fire and roasted them. Ding Shui was not as pretentious as Song Yushi. Although the roasted clams tasted fishy, she didn't say anything. She broke the shell and stuffed it into her mouth and started eating. Zhou Chuyu nodded when he saw this. It seemed that Ding Shui was also able to endure hardships. Seeing that it was late at night, Ding Shui asked Zhou Chuyu to lie down and rest, and she sat by the fire to keep watch. Seeing that she was so persistent, Zhou Chuyu didn't say anything and lay on the ground next to the fire and fell asleep. He didn't wake up until midnight. He glanced at Ding Shui, who was still sitting by the fire, and said to her, "Lie down and rest. Leave the rest of the night to me." Ding Shui then lay down on the ground and fell asleep soon. Zhou Chuyu sat by the fire until dawn. Chapter 8, playing with Liu Hainan and his group. Seeing the dawn, Zhou Chuyu stood up and stretched his muscles and bones, went to the coast to wash his face, and immediately felt a lot more awake. He began to search for useful supplies along the coast. He walked along the coast for a while and saw an iron bucket floating on the water not far away. He immediately took off his clothes, jumped into the sea and swam towards the floating bucket. He salvaged the iron bucket in less than 20 minutes. The bucket was about the thickness of a water bucket. Judging from the packaging and writing on the outside, it seemed to be used to hold paint. He put on his clothes and picked up a stone and smashed the lid of the paint bucket. Soon, the lid of the paint bucket was smashed open, and some red paint was still left inside. He took the paint bucket and returned to the tree. He directly turned the paint bucket upside down on the fire and burned it. Soon, the remaining paint in the paint bucket was also ignited, and a puff of black smoke suddenly floated out of the fire, mixed with an unpleasant smell. Ding Shui was also awakened by the smell, rubbed her sleepy eyes and said to Zhou Chuyu, "Brother Zhou, what are you burning? Why is it so smelly?" Zhou Chuyu smiled and said, "I salvaged a paint bucket on the sea, and there is still some residual paint in it. I plan to burn this paint bucket and use it as a pot." After about 20 minutes, the paint in the paint bucket was burned clean. Zhou Chuyu immediately found a wooden stick to get the paint bucket out and put it aside. Until the paint bucket was completely cooled down, he picked up the paint bucket and came to the coast to start cleaning. It took almost half an hour to clean the paint bucket. Liu Hainan and his group stayed on the coast without looking for food. In their opinion, the rescue team should find this place in a few days. Since Liu Hainan was elected as the leader by everyone yesterday, he has been the one to distribute the collected materials. Last night, he gave everyone half a bottle of mineral water and a small piece of compressed biscuits. How could this little bit of food fill everyone up? But everyone also knew the importance of food at the moment, so there were no excessive complaints. Everyone woke up early this morning, or they woke up because of hunger. They all shouted for Liu Hainan to distribute food. Until noon, Liu Hainan gave everyone half a bottle of mineral water and a little pitiful food. Song Yushi finished the half bottle of mineral water in one breath, and then walked to Liu Hainan and said to him, "Can you give me another bottle of water? I can give you money after I leave here." Hearing her say this, a man in his 30s suddenly stood up and said, "You are rich, so great. Don't you know how precious this water is?" Others also began to blame her, seeing that she had already aroused public anger. Until this time, she still naively thought that money could solve everything. Seeing this, the female anchor named Wenruchichi immediately stood up and came to her, holding her, and whispered to her, "Say less. Not everything here can be solved with money. There are also many rich people among these people." Hearing her say this, Song Yushi dared not speak anymore, and Liu Hainan looked at her with a lecherous look and said, "Everyone's water and food are uniformly distributed every day. If you are willing to pay, I can give you the food and water in my hand." Hearing Liu Hainan say this, Song Yushi asked stupidly, "How do you want me to pay?" Before Liu Hainan could speak, Marhu on the side said with a smile, "Don't you understand? As long as you are willing to sleep with my cousin, he will give you the food and water in his hand." Hearing Marhu say this, Song Yushi's face turned green with anger. She was so angry that she couldn't speak for a while. After a long time, she said angrily, "Isn't it just a bottle of water? What's the big deal? There is a large piece of coconuts over there. I don't want your water. You want me to sleep with you. You are just dreaming." Hearing her say this, Liu Hainan immediately stood up from the ground and said to her, "Where are the coconuts you said?" Song Yushi said unhappily, "It's just where Zhou Chuyu lives. Nearby. There is a large area of coconut trees there." Hearing Song Yushi say this, many people were extremely happy and complained why she didn't say it earlier. Liu Hainan took a bottle of water from the ground and handed it to her directly, saying to her excitedly, "This bottle of water is a reward for you. If you pick coconuts, you will get more." After that, he said to others, "Let's go pick coconuts together." Led by Song Yushi, a group of people walked towards the beach where coconut trees grew. To get to the place where coconut trees grew, they had to pass by where Zhou Chuyu lived. When they arrived at the place where Zhou Chuyu and Ding Shui lived, Zhou Chuyu was busy making pots with paint buckets, and Ding Shui was sitting under a big tree. Seeing Zhou Chuyu, Liu Hainan said with a smile. "Xiao Zhu, are you okay?" Zhou Chuyu said with a smile. "I'm fine. What are you guys going to do in such a large group?" Liu Hainan said with a smug look. "Of course we're going to pick coconuts. I heard from Song Yushi that there's a large area of coconut trees here." "You're so mean. You didn't even tell us that there's such a large area of coconut trees." Zhou Chuyu pretended to be angry and said. "I found that coconut tree first. Without my permission, who dares to pick it?" After saying that, he stood up and clenched his fists. Seeing him like this, Liu Hainan and the others were shocked, but then they thought of the fact that there were so many people on their side. "Are you still afraid of him alone?" Liu Hainan immediately had the confidence to say to him. "Although you are quite skilled, if so many of us rush at you, do you think you can handle it? You said you found the coconut tree first, do you think it will respond if you call it? As long as it is on this deserted island, it belongs to everyone." Hearing him say this, Zhou Chuyu pretended to be very angry, clenching his fists and punching the air constantly, while Ding Shui was confused by his action. Didn't he pick all the coconuts and hide them yesterday? Why is he still so angry now? Little did he know that Zhou Chuyu did this just to confuse and play tricks on Liu Hainan and others. Seeing his furious look, Liu Hainan thought he was afraid of him and said smugly, "Xiao Zhu, we are going to pick coconuts now. You just stay here. Don't worry, I will definitely leave a few for you." After that, he led a group of people to walk towards the coconut tree. When they arrived in front of the coconut tree, they were dumbfounded. There was no half a coconut on the tree. There were only a few rotten coconuts on the ground, which were covered with insects and flies. Liu Hainan turned his head and said to Song Yushi, "Are you sure there are really coconuts here?" Song Yushi was also confused at this time, but still said with certainty, "I saw a lot of coconuts here the day before yesterday. How come they are gone in an instant? Could it be that Zhou Chuyu picked them up?" Liu Hainan said angrily. "Didn't you see that he almost fought with us when he heard that we were coming to pick coconuts? If he had picked the coconuts, would it be the same?" Song Yushi didn't know what to do for a moment after hearing him say this. Whatever she said, Liu Hainan angrily said to her, "I just gave you a bottle of water, and you have no water tonight." After that, he led a group of people back along the original route, and Song Yushi was so aggrieved that she almost cried. Chapter 9 Acting. After seeing Liu Hainan and the others leave, Ding Shui said to Zhou Chuyu, "Brother Zhu, didn't we pick all the coconuts and hide them yesterday? Why were you so angry just now?" Zhou Chuyu said with a smile. "As the saying goes, all is fair in war. I did this to confuse them. Although it is easier to deal with a few of them, I am also afraid that they will fight me to the death." Hearing him say this, Ding Shui smiled. "Brother Zhu, I didn't expect you to be so cunning. I really admire you. If they see that there are no coconuts, I don't know how angry they will be. It's funny to think about it." Zhou Chuyu squatted again down and started fiddling with the paint bucket. Soon, Liu Hainan and his friends returned angrily. Zhou Chuyu immediately stood up and blocked them and said, "Where are the coconuts? After all, I saw the coconuts first. You have to give me some anyway." Hearing him say this, Liu Hainan was immediately furious and said, "I want to ask you something. Where are the coconuts?" Zhou Chuyu pretended to be stupid and said, "What do you mean? Did you not pick any coconuts?" Looking at Zhou Chuyu's appearance, Liu Hainan and his friends were also confused. Liu Hainan said angrily, "Where are the coconuts? When we went under the coconut tree, we saw several rotten coconuts." Hearing him say this, Zhou Chuyu pretended to be puzzled and said, "You said that there are no more coconuts on the tree." Liu Hainan nodded, and Zhou Chuyu said loudly, "How is it possible? I picked up a few with Ding Shui yesterday. How could there be no more? No, I have to go and see." After saying that, he walked quickly towards the place where the coconut trees grew. Song Yushi said to him again, "You don't need to go and see, there are really no coconuts there." At this time, Zhou Chuyu stopped and said in confusion, "Is there anyone else on this deserted island?" Hearing him say this, Liu Hainan and others also agreed with him. If there were no other people, how could the coconuts disappear? Watching him acting, Ding Shui couldn't help but laugh, but still pretended to be sorry and said, "Brother Zhu, there are no coconuts now, what should we do in the future? We can't drink sea water." Zhou Chuyu didn't expect Ding Shui to start acting with him, and said to her with a drooping face, "Don't worry, don't we still have more than 20 coconuts in our shelter? These coconuts are enough for us to eat for a week. The rescue team should find this place by then. If it doesn't work, I'll go to the woods to find water for you to drink." Ding Shui nodded helplessly and said, "This is the only way now." When Liu Hainan and his group heard that there were more than 20 coconuts in Zhou Chuyu's shelter, their eyes lit up immediately. If they didn't know Zhou Chuyu was very skilled, they would have started to rob them long ago. Liu Hainan suddenly took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, walked up to Liu Hainan and said with a smile, "Xiao Zhu, you still have more than 20 coconuts, can you give us half of them?" After saying that, he took out a cigarette from the pack and handed it to him. Zhou Chuyu hadn't smoked for several days, and he was already choking. After taking the cigarette, he put it in his mouth, walked quickly to the fire, took a burning firewood from the fire, lit the cigarette and took a deep puff. Then he said to Liu Hainan, "You also know that we only have these 20-odd coconuts left, and I still hope to survive here with these coconuts." Hearing him say this, Liu Hainan immediately said with a smile, "I won't ask for you for nothing, how about I give you 3 boxes of cigarettes in exchange?" Zhou Chuyu shook his head and said, "3 boxes of cigarettes won't work, don't you have a knife there? How about using that knife and 3 boxes of cigarettes to exchange for 10 coconuts?" Hearing him say this, Liu Hainan smiled and said, "Brother, you have a good calculation, you want to exchange 10 coconuts for a knife and 3 coconuts, unless you give me all the coconuts." Zhou Chuyu shook his head and said, "I still hope to survive with these coconuts, I don't want your knife, so I'll use 10 coconuts to exchange for your 3 boxes of cigarettes." Hearing him say this, Liu Hainan immediately nodded and agreed to the exchange, and then took out 3 boxes of unopened cigarettes from his pocket. Seeing the cigarette in his hand, Zhou Chuyu turned around and was about to go to the shelter to get the coconut. Seeing this, Ding Shui immediately stood in front of him and pretended to be angry and said to him, "Brother Zhu, you can't be so selfish. You know, we still rely on this coconut to survive here." Zhou Chuyu saw that she started to act again, so he simply acted to the end, pushed her hard and said, "You don't have the right to speak here, go wherever it's cool." After he said this, Ding Shui looked aggrieved. Seeing this, Ma Hu immediately said to her, "Xiexue, you are not welcome here either. Why don't you go back with us?" Ding Shui said angrily, "I would rather starve to death than go back with you. Don't think I don't know what you want to do." After that, she simply sat on the ground and cried. At this time, the people on Liu Hainan's side began to sympathize with her, and secretly cursed Zhou Chuyu for being a piece of shit. Only the anchor named Gentle Chichi was thinking about something. Soon Zhou Chuyu came out of the shelter with 10 coconuts in his clothes. Looking at Ding Shui who was still crying on the ground, Zhou Chuyu said impatiently, "Cry, cry, you just cry all day. I don't know what use you are." After that, he came to Liu Hainan, put the coconut on the ground, snatched a cigarette from Liu Hainan, tore open the package, picked up a cigarette and put it in his mouth, and quickly came to the fire, picked up a burning firewood, lit the cigarette and smoked it with a look of enjoyment. Seeing Ding Shui still crying, Song Yushi said angrily, "Zhou Chuyu, are you still a man? How can you treat a girl like this?" Zhou Chuyu said angrily, "You can find out if I am a man by trying it. How I treat her is none of your business." After that, he smoked by himself. Song Yushi wanted to say something else, but Gentle Chichi grabbed her and signaled her not to say anything more. Song Yushi stopped talking, while Liu Hainan and the others happily picked up the coconuts on the ground and went back. The girl named Wenru Chichi deliberately walked to the back, and waited until Liu Hainan and the others walked more than 10 meters away before she walked to Zhou Chuyu, took the initiative to extend a hand, and said to him with a smile, "Hello, my name is Bai Ruolan, please take care of me in the future." Seeing her take the initiative to greet him, Zhou Chuyu was stunned for a moment, but still smiled and shook hands with her, and said carelessly, "I can't even protect myself, what do I need to take care of you?" Bai Ruolan smiled and whispered, "You acted well." After that, she turned around and left. Looking at Bai Ruolan's back, Zhou Chuyu couldn't help but smile, thinking that he didn't expect to be seen through by her. It seems that this female anchor is quite interesting. Looking at Ding Shui who was still crying on the ground, Zhou Chuyu said with a smile, "Everyone has gone far away, why are you still acting? Hearing him say this, Ding Shui immediately stood up from the ground and said with a smile, "Brother Zhu, how was my acting?" Zhou Chuyu nodded and said, "It was pretty good, it can be considered the level of a movie queen." Ding Shui said to him again, "Why didn't you agree to use these coconuts to exchange the knife?" Zhou Chuyu said with a smile, "If I do that, Liu Hainan and the others will definitely be on guard, and it will be more difficult to exchange things in the future. I just want to give them an illusion. Let them feel that I am not a threat to them, so that they will exchange things with me without any defense." Hearing him say this, Ding Shui said with a smile, "Brother Zhu, I really admire you more and more." Zhu Chuyu smiled and said nothing more, squatted down and started to fiddle with the paint bucket again. Chapter 10 Talking Behind the Scenes. It took more than an hour to finally make a pot with a paint bucket, and it was getting late. Take the wooden stick that was polished yesterday, go to the reef on the coast, take off your clothes and pants, go into the sea and start catching lobsters. It took more than an hour to finally catch 7 or 8 lobsters. Take the lobsters to the big tree, dig out some charcoal from the fire, put the lobsters on it and roast them. After the lobsters were roasted, the two sat on the ground, picked up the lobsters, peeled them, stuffed them into their mouths and started eating. After eating grilled lobster, the sun was about to set, and Ding Shui said to Zhu Chuyu, "Brother Zhu, I haven't taken a bath for several days. Now my body smells weird. I want to take a bath in the sea." Hearing her say this, Zhu Chuyu nodded, took another look at her clothes that were already very dirty, then stood up and returned to the shelter, took out a set of clothes that he had taken off the 2 corpses a few days ago, and said to her, "Look, your clothes are very dirty, take these clothes and wear them for a while." Looking at the clothes Zhu Chuyu handed over, Ding Shui asked, "Brother Zhu, where did you get these clothes?" Zhu Chuyu smiled. "I took them off their corpses. If you don't like them, you don't have to wear them." Ding Shui was just stunned, then took the clothes from Zhu Chuyu and walked towards the beach. Zhu Chuyu looked at her back and smiled. Ding Shui came to the coast, found a relatively secluded place, took off her clothes and pants, went into the sea and started to take a bath. After taking a bath, she washed the clothes she changed, took them back to the shelter and hung them on the branches to dry. The two of them sat by the fire at the door of the shelter, listening to the sound of waves hitting the rocks and looking at the starry sky. Ding Shui couldn't help but said to Zhu Chuyu, "Brother Zhu, do you think we can wait until the rescue team arrives?" Zhu Chuyu shook his head and said, "I don't know about this, but I feel that if there is a rescue team, they would have found this place a long time ago. Judging from the situation, our chances of being rescued should be small." Hearing Zhu Chuyu say this, Ding Shui couldn't help but feel a little frustrated, and said again, "Are we going to be trapped here for the rest of our lives?" Zhu Chuyu said with a smile, "That's not the case. Maybe one day we can leave here when we meet a passing ship. But we have to learn to protect ourselves here. We can't trust anyone and we can't be soft-hearted." Hearing him say this, Ding Shui nodded as if she understood, and then said to him, "Brother Zhu, you are so powerful. What did you do before? How come you are security guard on a cruise ship?" Hearing her ask this, Zhu Chuyu took out a cigarette from his pocket, put it in his mouth, lit it, took a deep puff, and then slowly spoke. "I was in the army for a few years before I retired and went home. I spent all my retirement money on my mother's surgery. I came to the cruise ship to be a security guard for a living. I thought I had found an easy job, but I didn't expect that this cruise ship would have an accident." After saying this, Ding Shui sighed deeply. Hearing him say this, Ding Shui smiled and said, "Wow. I didn't expect you to have been a soldier. You don't know that I like being a soldier the most. I dream of finding a soldier as my boyfriend. You are not married yet, right?" Zhu Chuyu shook his head and said, "It was hard to see a woman in the army before. After I was discharged, I spent almost all my savings to take care of my mother. I have no money and no friends. Who would like me?" Hearing Zhu Chuyu say this, Ding Shui smiled and said, "Brother Zhu, how about I be your girlfriend?" Zhu Chuyu smiled and said, "As long as you don't mind my poverty." The two chatted for a while, and Zhu Chuyu added some firewood to their fire. Then they went to the shelter and lay on the palm leaves to sleep. Liu Hainan's side was not as good as Zhu Chuyu's. Today, he exchanged 3 boxes of cigarettes for 10 coconuts, but there were more than 20 people in their group, and the coconut juice each person drank was pitiful. Although they had a lot of supplies, there were too many people, so each person could only get a bottle of water and a little food every day. At this time, they were still waiting for the rescue team to arrive with great expectation. At this time, everyone was sitting around a huge fire and chatting. Marhu said to Liu Hainan, "Cousin, I think Zhou Chuyu is just a little bit better in martial arts. In the end, he is just a simple-minded guy with strong limbs. He did that for 3 boxes of cigarettes." Hearing him say this, Liu Hainan nodded and said, "It seems that I really overestimated him. Let him show off for 2 days. After he finishes eating the coconuts in his hand, he will come to me and beg me. Then I will see how I will deal with him. As for Ding Shui, I will leave it to you to deal with." Hearing Liu Hainan say this, Marhu couldn't help but smile. He had already started to imagine how to deal with Ding Shui in his mind. Hearing the conversation between the two, many people laughed. Yes. The boss is right. Zhou Chuyu is a simple-minded guy with strong limbs. I think in a few days, he will come to us like a dog to beg for shelter. Yes. Now I want to see how he comes to beg us to take him in. Yes. Why did he have to offend the boss when he could have offended anyone else? When he comes to beg us in a few days, we must give him a good beating. Yes. And that little bitch Ding Shui insisted on suffering with him. I don't know where she got the blessing that Brother Ma likes her. Everyone talked about Zhou Chuyu and the other person. Even Song Yushi spoke up. I thought Zhou Chuyu was a good person. Seeing what he did today, I was so disappointed. I didn't expect him to be such a person. Listening to everyone talking about Zhou Chuyu and the other person, Bai Ruolan looked at this group of people as if they were clowns. She thought to herself, "You were fooled by him, and you are still so proud of yourself. I saw that it was not Zhou Chuyu who came to beg you for help in the past 2 days, but you went to beg him instead." Seeing that Song Yushi was still scolding Zhou Chuyu, Bai Ruolan pulled her with her hand and whispered to her, "Just say less. Zhou Chuyu is not the kind of person you think." Hearing Bai Ruolan say this, Song Yushi said to her, "Then what kind of person do you think she is? Didn't you see what happened today? For 3 boxes of cigarettes, she actually attacked Ding Shui. Which man would do this?" Bai Ruolan did not explain too much, but just said to her, "You will know in a few days, and you will not think so then." Song Yushi naturally disdained Bai Ruolan's words and said with a sneer, "Then I'll wait and see. I want to see how he comes to ask us to take him in a few days." A group of people sat around a fire and chatted until very late. Liu Hainan asked the others lay down to sleep, while he and Marhu stayed behind to keep watch. Seeing that Liu Hainan was so kind to them, the group of people were moved again. Chapter 11 Conversation between Liu Hainan and Marhu. Seeing that a group of people had fallen asleep, Liu Hainan winked at Marhu, stood up and walked towards the coast, and Marhu also stood up and followed him. When they came to the coast and walked behind a reef, Liu Hainan took out some food from his pocket, gave some to Marhu, and took out 2 bottles of mineral water and handed one to him. The two of them ate and drank mineral water. After they were full, Marhu burped and said to Liu Hainan, "Cousin, when can I do something to those girls? I can't hold it anymore. You don't know how uncomfortable it is to see them hanging around in front of me every day." Liu Hainan took out a cigarette from his pocket and handed it to him. He took out another one and put it in his mouth. He took out a windproof lighter from his pocket, lit the cigarette and took a deep puff before slowly speaking. "I am the same as you. Especially when I see the 2 beauties Song Yushi and Bai Ruolan, I will have wild thoughts." Hearing him say this, Marhu immediately said, "In that case, what are you waiting for? Just trick them into the woods and force them. Anyway, they are on this deserted island and I don't think they can cause any trouble." Hearing Marhu say this, Liu Hainan felt a little hateful. "Iron is not steel," said. "How can you be as simple-minded and strong-limbed as Zhou Chuyu? If we do that now, if the rescue team finds this place in 2 days, we will be in jail after we go back." Hearing him say this, Marhu said nonchalantly, "This is not easy. Just kill them after playing, and say to the outside world that they were dragged away by wild beasts, and no one will doubt it." Liu Hainan slapped his head hard with his hand and said, "It's true that you are simple-minded and strong-limbed. If we kill them, how can we play in the future? We have to make them willingly submit to us. Even if the rescue team finds this place, we can say that they volunteered, and we will be fine at that time." Hearing Liu Hainan say this, Marhu immediately raised a thumb and said, "Cousin, you are still thoughtful. How long do we have to wait?" Liu Hainan glared at him fiercely and said, You can't eat hot tofu in a hurry. You have to do everything step by step. Be patient for a few days. If other people heard what the two said, I wonder what they would think. Marhu said again. Cousin, I think there is no point in keeping those men. It is better to lure them into the woods and kill them. It is a waste of food to keep them anyway. Liu Hainan said slowly. Do you think I want to keep them? I am afraid that the rescue team can't find this place. No one knows how dangerous it is in this woods. When the time comes, let them go to the woods to find food. As for their life or death, it depends on their own luck. The two chatted for a long time behind the reef, and then walked to the fire. They looked at the girls who were already asleep, and they couldn't help swallowing their saliva. The next morning, Zhou Chuyu woke up at dawn, looked at Ding Shui who was still sleeping, climbed up from the palm leaves and walked out of the shelter. He saw that the firewood on the fire had been burned to only some charcoal, which was still emitting wisps of green smoke. There was no lighter at the moment, so he could only take some firewood and put it on the fire. He put his mouth close to it and blew hard for a while, and the fire started burning again. I came to the coast and washed my face, and walked along. I walked towards the coast and walked for more than an hour. Apart from some garbage washed ashore by the sea, I didn't see any other usable supplies. I sat on the beach to rest for a while, then stood up and continued to search along the coast. After walking for a while, I suddenly saw a pink suitcase floating on the sea not far away. I quickly took off my clothes and pants, jumped into the sea and swam towards the suitcase. It took me nearly 20 minutes to finally drag the suitcase to the coast. At this time, seawater continued to leak out of the suitcase. Judging from the color of the suitcase, it should belong to a woman. Zhou Chuyu was very curious about what was inside. But there was a combination lock on the suitcase, but how could this be difficult for Zhou Chuyu? He just picked up a stone and smashed the combination lock. Soon, the combination lock was smashed to pieces. Even the zipper was directly broken by him. When Zhou Chuyu opened the suitcase and saw the things inside, he blushed immediately. He saw that the suitcase was actually filled with various sexy uniforms, stockings, some underwear, some adult products, several packs of sanitary napkins, and some Durex. Zhou Chuyu in his head, he couldn't help but imagine what kind of woman the owner of the suitcase was. If he took these things back, Ding Shui didn't know how to bury himself. Originally, he planned to throw these things directly into the sea, but after thinking carefully, maybe these things would be useful to him in the future. He put on his clothes and went directly to the woods with the suitcase. He found a stick and dug a deep pit under a big tree. He took out a pack of sanitary napkins from the suitcase, thinking that Ding Shui might be able to use this thing, and then buried the suitcase directly in the deep pit, and stepped on it firmly. In order to be discovered by others, he sprinkled some leaves and dead grass on it. He then took the sanitary napkin and walked towards the shelter. When he returned to the shelter, he saw Ding Shui sitting by the fire. Seeing him come back, Ding Shui said with a worried face. Brother Zhu, what did you do? I thought you didn't want me anymore. Zhou Chuyu said with a smile. How could I abandon you? I just took a stroll along the coast. After saying that, he handed the sanitary napkin in his hand to Ding Shui. Looking at the sanitary napkin handed over by Zhou Chuyu, Ding Shui took it with a red face and whispered. Brother Zhu, where did you get this thing? Zhou Chuyu did not tell her that he had picked up the suitcase, but just said that the sanitary napkin was picked up on the coast. After sitting by the fire and smoking a cigarette, he picked up a wooden stick and went to the coast, took off his clothes and pants, went down to the sea and started catching lobsters. It took more than an hour to finally catch a few lobsters, took them back to the fire, put them on the charcoal and grilled them. After eating the grilled lobsters, Zhou Chuyu said to Ding Shui. You stay here, I'll go to the woods to see if I can find water and food. Eating lobsters and clams every day is not nutritious. Hearing him say this, Ding Shui hurriedly said to him. Brother Zhu, why don't I go with you? I don't dare to stay here alone. Zhou Chuyu could only nod in agreement and told her to follow him closely. Zhou Chuyu came to the coast again and found a few plastic bags from the garbage pile washed ashore by the sea. He tore them open and tied up his sleeves and trouser legs, and asked Ding Shui to tie up her sleeves and trouser legs as well. He found a wooden stick for Ding Shui to hold in her hand and took the sharpened wooden stick himself. The two of them walked towards the woods. Chapter 12 Jungle Adventure. This forest is full of towering trees and dense bushes, as well as some thorns covered with barbs. It is summer now, and the whole forest is extremely hot. Before they walked out for long, their clothes were already wet with sweat. Zhou Chuyu led the way with a wooden stick, and Ding Shui followed closely behind him. Zhou Chuyu knew that this season was the season for poisonous snakes to appear, and he didn't know if there were any poisonous snakes on the island, so he was extremely cautious with every step. Just like this, before they walked out for long, the two were already panting and sweating. Ding Shui said to Zhou Chuyu, "Brother Zhou, can you stop and rest for a while? I really can't walk anymore." Hearing her say this and looking at her appearance, Zhou Chuyu nodded and said to her, "I told you to stay in the shelter, but you insisted on coming out with me. Now it's over, right?" After that, they found a big tree with lush growth, cleared the dead grass and leaves under the tree, and then they sat under the tree to rest. Zhou Chuyu did not dare to be careless for a moment, always paying attention to the surrounding environment. After resting for more than 10 minutes, the two stood up and continued to walk into the depths of the dense forest. Before they walked far, there was a burst of noise from the bushes not far away. Zhou Chuyu signaled Ding Shui to stand where she was, and he approached the bushes with a wooden stick. Before he got close, a grey hare suddenly jumped out of the bushes, looking at Zhou Chuyu with a silly face, and Zhou Chuyu immediately threw the wooden stick in his hand at the hare. The pointed wooden stick pierced into the hare's body fiercely. The hare also fell to the ground instantly, rolling over and over, screaming in pain. Zhou Chuyu walked quickly to the hare, raised his foot and stepped hard on the hare's head. The hare screamed and then stopped moving. Zhou Chuyu pulled the stick out of the hare's body, picked up the dead hare, and walked to Ding Shui's side. Seeing that Zhou Chuyu had gotten a hare so easily, Ding Shui said with admiration, "Brother Zhou didn't expect you to be so good. You got the hare so easily." Zhou Chuyu said with a smile, "Just now, I was just lucky. The hare on this deserted island may have never seen humans. If it was somewhere else, it would have run away long ago." The two continued to walk into the woods. They walked a long way and did not see any water sources. Instead, they saw a lot of pheasants and squirrels. But these pheasants and squirrels were all in the trees. Zhou Chuyu did not have a bow and arrow, so he could only watch them slip away. It had been almost 2 hours since they came out. The two were exhausted and did not continue to look for them. They turned around and walked towards the coast. Zhou Chuyu still led the way with a wooden stick in front, and Ding Shui followed behind him. Just as the two walked under a big tree, Ding Shui suddenly saw a snake hovering on the branch above Zhou Chuyu's head and spitting apricots at Zhou Chuyu. Seeing that this posture might attack Zhou Chuyu at any time, Ding Shui was immediately frightened and broke out in a cold sweat. She immediately stopped and said to Zhou Chuyu tremblingly, "Zhou, brother Zhou, look at your head." Hearing her say this, Zhou Chuyu also felt the danger and stood still immediately. He didn't dare to move for a moment. He glanced with the corner of his eyes and saw a snake spitting apricots at him above his head. The snake was green all over, almost the same color as the leaves. No wonder Zhou Chuyu didn't see it at the first time. Zhou Chuyu didn't know whether the snake was poisonous or not, and he was scared out of his wits. Standing in place and not daring to move, his eyes were fixed on the snake above his head. After about a minute or two, the snake suddenly attacked Zhou Chuyu. Zhou Chuyu also reacted quickly. When he saw the snake attacking him, he immediately dodged to the side and swung the wooden stick in his hand at the snake. This time Zhou Chuyu used all his strength, and the snake, which was as thick as his arm, was hit hard on the tree trunk by his stick, and then fell to the ground. Seeing the snake fall to the ground, Zhou Chuyu immediately picked up the stick and smashed the snake's head. After just a few hits, the snake's head was smashed to pieces and lay on the ground motionless. At this time, the two of them breathed a sigh of relief. Seeing that the snake's head was triangular in shape, it should be a poisonous snake. Zhou Chuyu thought to himself that it was a close call. If it weren't for Ding Shui's reminder, he might have been bitten by the snake. Picking up the snake on the ground, he said to Ding Shui, "Luckily, you were there just now. If you hadn't reminded me, who knows what would have happened. This forest is more dangerous than we thought. Let's go back to the coast quickly." Fortunately, they did not encounter any other dangers until they returned to the coast. After returning to the shelter, Zhou Chuyu picked up a stone and smashed 2 coconuts. He handed one to Ding Shui, picked up another, raised his head, and drank the coconut juice in one breath. After drinking the coconut juice, he took some firewood and put it in the fire. Then he took the hare and snake to the coast, found a sharp stone, and started to deal with the hare and snake. Because there were no suitable tools, it took almost an hour to deal with the hare and snake. He took them to the fire and used a stone to crack open a few coconuts, and pour the coconut juice directly into the pot made of paint buckets. Put the snake and the hare in and stew them. There are no coconuts in the shelter now. Zhou Chuyu asked Ding Xue to stay in the shelter, and he picked up a woven bag from the coast. When they came to the place where the coconuts were hidden, they dug some coconuts out and put them in the woven bag, and carried them back to the shelter. The two sat by the fire and chatted. Ding Xue said to Zhou Chuyu, "Brother Zhu, when are we going to go to Liu Hainan to exchange things?" Zhou Chuyu said with a smile, "I think their food is almost finished. Let them starve for 2 days first, and it will be easier to exchange things with them then." Ding Xue nodded and asked, "What are you going to exchange?" Hearing her ask this, Zhou Chuyu smiled and said, "Of course it's a knife and an axe, and we have to exchange some medicines. With these things, we can survive here better." After more than an hour, the hare and snake meat in the pot had already given off a fragrant aroma, and the two could not help but swallow their saliva. Zhou Chuyu broke off a few more wooden sticks to use as chopsticks, picked up a piece of snake meat and put it in his mouth and started eating. Ding Xue also broke off a rabbit leg, and didn't care about the hotness, and put it in her mouth and started chewing. Since Ding Xue didn't dare to eat snake meat, Zhou Chuyu ate the whole snake, and Ding Xue almost ate the whole hare. In the end, even the soup was drunk up without any leftovers. This meal was the most sumptuous meal the two had eaten since they came to this deserted island. Chapter 13: The Shameless Liu Hainan. After dinner, seeing that it was still early, Zhou Chuyu planned to catch some lobsters and said to Ding Xue, "Go pick up some firewood nearby, and I'll go catch some more lobsters." Hearing him say this, Ding Xue nodded and said, "We just had a full meal, why are you catching lobsters?" Zhou Chuyu said with a smile, "I want to catch more lobsters and exchange more with Liu Hainan and the others." Ding Xue said with a smile, "You are more thoughtful." After saying that, he stood up and went to pick up firewood nearby. Since we had to exchange lobsters for things, we couldn't let the lobsters die, so we couldn't use a wooden stick to fork them, which also increased the difficulty of catching lobsters. Walking to the coast, we first dug a pit nearly half a meter deep on the beach by the coast, intending to keep the caught lobsters in it. He walked to the reef again, took off his clothes and pants, went into the sea and took a deep breath, then dived into the seabed to catch lobsters. Although there were many lobsters in the crevices of the reef, each lobster weighed nearly half a pound, and the two large claws were also quite sharp. If you were caught by it, it would be no joke. So Zhou Chuyu was extremely cautious. It took him more than an hour to catch 5 or 6 lobsters and put them in the deep pit he had just dug. He climbed onto the reef and smoked a cigarette, then returned to the water to continue catching lobsters. He finally caught nearly 20 lobsters when it was almost dark. In order to prevent these lobsters from crawling out at night, he also found a few woven bags to cover the deep pit, and pressed the 4 sides with stones. He then put on his clothes and returned to the shelter. Ding Xue also picked up a lot of firewood and put it outside the shelter. The two of them sat by the fire at the entrance of the shelter and chatted until very late. Zhou Chuyu added some firewood to the fire, and then they returned to the shelter and lay on the palm leaves to sleep. In the middle of the night, the two were still sleeping soundly, and suddenly there was a roar of an animal in the woods. The two were awakened by the roar instantly. Zhou Chuyu quickly climbed up from the palm leaves and went to the entrance of the shelter to check. At this time, the roar was still coming. It should be not far from the shelter. Although the roar could be heard, it was pitch black in the woods and nothing could be seen. Ding Xue was frightened and her face turned pale. She trembled and asked Zhou Chuyu, "Brother Zhu, what kind of animal is making this sound? It sounds creepy." Zhou Chuyu turned to her and said, "This is the sound made by the wolves. You don't have to be too scared. We have a fire here. Wolves are afraid of fire. Although they are shouting so fiercely, they dare not attack us as long as the fire is not extinguished." After that, some firewood was added to the fire. Almost an hour passed like this, and the roar of the wolves gradually faded away until it disappeared. The two of them lay down on the palm leaves and slept again. The next morning, the sun had just risen and Zhou Chuyu had already woken up. After leaving the shelter, they couldn't wait to go to the coast to check the lobsters caught yesterday. Seeing that the lobsters were still safe and sound in the deep pit, Zhou Chuyu was relieved. He came to the coast and washed his face. Then he went to the gap between the rocks and smashed some clams with a stone. Then he went back to the fire and used a stick to dig out some charcoal from the fire. He put the clams on top and roasted them. When the clams were almost done, he went back to the shelter to wake up Ding Xue. After eating the roasted clams, Zhou Chuyu came to the rocks on the coast again, took off his clothes and pants, went into the sea and continued to catch lobsters. It took another day, and Zhou Chuyu caught dozens of lobsters in the sea. So many lobsters should be able to exchange for a lot of things. He planned to take lobsters and coconuts to Liu Hainan and others to exchange things tomorrow morning. It was not so good for Liu Hainan. These days, a group of people had been waiting for the arrival of the rescue team on the coast, and they did not go out to find food and water. The collected supplies were also getting less and less. Although Liu Hainan was elected as the leader by this group of people, he was not responsible for this group of people. It can be said that he had no experience in surviving in the wild. He and Marhu took the initiative to keep watch every night, mainly because they waited for others to fall asleep so that they could steal food, but others didn't know and were still grateful to them. After giving everyone the remaining food and water this afternoon, there was no more food. At this time, everyone began to panic, and many people began to complain. Seeing that everyone was emotional, Liu Hainan shamelessly told everyone how rich his and Marhu's experience in surviving in the wild was, and it was not a piece of cake to find food and water. And he repeatedly promised to take a few people to the woods to find food and water every morning. Many people believed what he said. Bai Ruolan was a little disdainful of what he said. If food and water were so easy to find as he said, he would have gone to find them long ago, and everyone would not have to eat the last meal without the next meal. These 2 days, Bai Ruolan would think of Zhou Chuyu from time to time. She wanted to go to Zhou Chuyu. In her opinion, only Zhou Chuyu could lead her to survive here. The next morning, as soon as it was light, Liu Hainan called a few men to walk into the woods. Although they saw a lot of pheasants and hares, they had no tools and no hunting experience, so they could only watch the hares and pheasants slip away. They wandered around in the woods for almost an hour, but they didn't find any water or food, which made them exhausted. A man said with some dissatisfaction, "Boss, didn't you say that finding food and water would be easy? Why haven't you found food and water for so long?" Hearing him say this, Liu Hainan's face suddenly became a little embarrassed, and he said breathlessly, "It's only been more than an hour. Why are you in such a hurry? Don't worry, we will definitely find food." At this time, a man spoke again. "I'm really tired, I have to sit down and rest for a while." After that, he sat on the ground to rest. Seeing this, others also sat on the ground to rest. Liu Hainan and Marhu were also exhausted, and they also sat on the ground and gasped. At this moment, a snake suddenly swam towards a man silently. The man did not notice the snake at all. When he found it, it was too late. The snake had already bitten his foot hard and quickly burrowed into the bushes next to him. The man immediately screamed loudly, "I was bitten by a snake." Other people heard his shouting and ran to him. Liu Hainan lifted his trouser legs and saw a row of teeth marks on his feet. Blood continued to flow out of the wound, and the area around the wound swelled up at a speed visible to the naked eye. The man also lay on the ground and wailed. After a while, he gradually lost consciousness. At this time, everyone realized that the snake that bit him was a poisonous snake with a highly venomous poison. After a few minutes, the man was completely dead. Seeing a living person die in just a few minutes, everyone was shocked. A man suddenly shouted loudly, "It's too dangerous in this forest. No, I have to go back to the coast. I don't want to die here." After that, he ran towards the beach like crazy. Chapter 14: Exchange of Supplies. After the first one, there was the second one. This group of people ran towards the coast in a panic, fearing that if they ran too slowly, they would be the next to die. Even Liu Hainan and Marhu ran towards the coast. Seeing everyone running back in a mess, Song Yushi said, "What happened to you? Why did you run back?" A man sat on the beach panting, his face pale. "Damn it, it's too dangerous in this forest. There are poisonous snakes that bite people to death. I won't go there even if I starve to death." Hearing him say this, the faces of the people who stayed on the coast changed. Soon, Liu Hainan and Marhu also ran back to the coast panting, sat on the ground and gasped. Bai Ruolan couldn't help laughing when she saw the two people in such a mess. Last night, they swore that finding food and water was a piece of cake. Unexpectedly, they ran back in a hurry. At this time, the female anchor who was slapped on the cruise ship spoke again. "Boss, you are blind. We have no food and water. What should we do next? I don't want to starve to death here." Liu Hainan glared at him angrily, thinking that you are really talking about something irrelevant. After a rest, he said stubbornly. Why are you in such a hurry? As long as I am here, you won't starve. Although he said so, he didn't know where to get food back now. Since eating a little yesterday, everyone has not eaten anything. At this time, they are so hungry. Just when everyone was at a loss, they saw Zhou Chuyu and Ding Shui, each carrying a woven bag and walking towards this side. Seeing the two people, Liu Hainan immediately got up from the ground, and the others also stood up and looked at the two people. Everyone thought that the two of them came to seek refuge with them. Marhu said with a smile. I thought they could hold out for a few days, but I didn't expect them to come to us so soon. Let me see how I deal with them. Soon Zhou Chuyu and Ding Shui came to the front of the crowd, put the woven bag on the ground, and looked at Liu Hainan. Before Liu Hainan could speak, Marhu said arrogantly. Xiaoju couldn't survive so soon and came to us. As long as you apologize to me and let Ding Shui accompany me for one night, I will take you in. What do you think? Hearing Marhu say this, Ding Shui was furious and said. Go home and let your mother accompany you. I think you are crazy about women. Hearing Ding Shui scolding him like this, Marhu was so angry that his teeth itched. He wanted to catch her and teach her a lesson right now, but seeing Zhou Chuyu with an expressionless face, he finally gave up the idea. Liu Hainan continued, Xiaoju. Since you have come to us, you should show some sincerity. How can I take you in like this? Even if I agree, they won't agree. After that, he said to the others, don't you think so? The group of people also began to agree, shouting for the two to leave. After hearing what the group of people said, Zhou Chuyu smiled and said, a bunch of idiots. He turned to Ding Shui and said, Xiao Shui, I sent them something to eat with good intentions, but I didn't expect them to be so ungrateful. Since they don't welcome us so much, let's go. After that, he squatted down, grabbed the woven bag, and directly poured out the lobsters and coconuts in the woven bag. Looking at the lobsters and coconuts all over the ground, Liu Hainan and his group of people suddenly had shining eyes, looking at the lobsters and coconuts on the ground with greed. Seeing the greedy eyes of the crowd, Zhou Chuyu couldn't help but smile, and deliberately said loudly to Ding Shui. Look how careless I am. The lobsters are gone, hurry up and put them back. Hearing him say this, Ding Shui was also acting like a drama queen, squatting down and starting to pick up the lobsters on the ground and put them into the woven bag. At this time, a man suddenly ran over quickly and was about to grab the coconut on the ground. Before he got close to Zhou Chuyu, he ran over quickly and kicked him hard in the stomach. This kick directly kicked the man 3 or 4 meters away, and he fell heavily on the beach. Seeing Zhou Chuyu was so powerful, other people no longer had the idea of robbing him. Seeing that everyone was stunned, Zhou Chuyu smiled and said, do you have any shame? You actually robbed them. You can eat coconuts and lobsters. You can exchange them with something else. After hearing him say this, a man suddenly took off a valuable watch from his wrist, walked up to Zhou Chuyu and said, can I have a look at my watch? Zhou Chuyu took a look at the watch and thought it was a good thing, but still said expressionlessly. Your watch has no use to me here, but you look quite pitiful. I can exchange it for a coconut and 2 lobsters for you. What do you think? The man nodded immediately and stuffed the watch into Zhou Chuyu's hand. Zhou Chuyu squatted down and took a coconut and 2 lobsters and handed them to him. The man took the lobsters and coconuts and ran towards the fire happily. At this time, another man said to Zhou Chuyu, wait for me, I'll find something to exchange with you. After that, he ran into the woods quickly. After more than 10 minutes, the man came out of the woods with 2 packs of cigarettes in his hand. There was still some dirt on them. It looked like they were just dug out of the ground. Seeing that the man actually took out 2 packs of cigarettes, Zhou Chuyu's eyes lit up immediately. Liu Hainan and Marhu cursed the man's ancestors. Didn't they say that everyone should hand over their collected things? Unexpectedly, this guy actually hid 2 packs of cigarettes. Little did they know that most of the people present did not hand over all their collected things, and even Liu Hainan and Marhu hid some things. The man walked up to Zhou Chuyu with a cigarette and said to him, what do you think I can exchange these 2 cigarettes for? Zhou Chuyu smiled and said, this is a good thing. I can give you 3 coconuts and 4 lobsters. What do you think? Hearing that he could exchange 3 coconuts and 4 lobsters, the man nodded immediately and handed the cigarette in his hand to Zhou Chuyu. Zhou Chuyu asked Ding Shui to get him 3 coconuts and 4 lobsters. After taking the lobsters and coconuts, the man ran quickly into the woods, perhaps because he was afraid that others would snatch them. At this time, another man said to Zhou Chuyu, "Can I exchange medicines?" Zhou Chuyu looked at him and asked, "What medicines do you have?" The man replied, "I have some anti-inflammatory and hemostatic medicines, as well as some medicines for treating colds and fevers." Zhou Chuyu was happy again when he heard him say this. "You know, these medicines can save lives on this deserted island." He nodded and said, "Go and get them. I can also give you 3 coconuts and 4 lobsters." Hearing that he could exchange so many things, the man also ran quickly into the woods. Chapter 15: A Great Harvest. In less than 10 minutes, the man came out with a plastic bag. The bag was covered with dirt. It looked like it was dug out from the soil. It seemed that this group of people had hidden a lot of things. The man quickly ran up to Zhou Chuyu and handed him the plastic bag. Zhou Chuyu opened the bag and saw that it was filled with some medicines. He also asked Ding Shui to get him some lobster and coconut. This person was afraid that his things would be snatched away by others, so he quickly went to the woods. Seeing that the 3 people had exchanged their things for coconuts and lobsters, many people present wanted to go to the woods and take out their own hidden things to exchange for food. At this moment, Liu Hainan suddenly said loudly, "Xiao Ju, how about returning all the remaining coconuts and lobsters to me?" After hearing what he said, those who seemed to be going to the woods to get something also stopped, and Zhou Chuyu smiled and said, "Sure. As long as you have enough, I can give you all these coconuts and lobsters. It depends on what you want to exchange for it." Hearing him say this, Liu Hainan did not hide anything, and shouted Marhu and turned around to get his things. Seeing them leave, Song Yushi walked up to Zhou Chuyu and whispered to him, "Can you give me some coconuts and lobsters? I can give you a lot of money when we leave here." Zhou Chuyu just couldn't stand her being like this, and then said coldly, "What do I need the money for? Do you think we can get out of here?" Hearing him say this, Song Yushi was stunned and asked in confusion, "What do you mean by that?" Zhou Chuyu slowly said, "It's been so many days, and the rescue team hasn't found this place yet. Maybe they have given up on the rescue a long time ago, and you're still dreaming of leaving here." After hearing him say this, everyone at the scene was extremely frustrated and lost. Perhaps, just as Zhou Chuyu said, they would never see the rescue team arrive. Song Yushi also lowered her head. Seeing her like this, Zhou Chuyu squatted down, took out a coconut and 2 lobsters and handed them to her, saying to her, "Take this and eat it. And don't always ask for money in front of me. Food is the most important thing here. No matter how rich you are, it's worthless here." Taking the lobster and coconut handed over by Zhou Chuyu, Song Yushi said thank you to him and walked towards the fire. She was thinking about what Zhou Chuyu had just said. Yes, what's the use of being rich here? I never thought that as an old female anchor like myself, there would be a day when I would come to the fire, smash the coconut with stones with great effort, and then put the lobster on the fire to roast. After taking a sip of coconut milk, tears started flowing unconsciously. At this time, Bai Ruolan also walked up to Zhou Chuyu, took off the gold necklace she was wearing, lowered her posture and said to Zhou Chuyu, "I don't have any hidden possessions like them. This necklace is the only valuable thing on my body. I wonder if you like it. If you do, please give me something to eat. I'm really starving." Zhou Chuyu also had a good impression of the extremely smart Bai Ruolan, and then said to her, "Your necklace is of no use to me, you should keep it for yourself." After that, he picked up 2 coconuts and 2 lobsters from the ground and handed them to her, saying to her, "Take it and eat it first. If you run out of food later, you can come find me." Hearing Zhou Chuyu say this, Bai Ruolan thanked him again, then walked towards the fire with the coconut. Soon Liu Hainan and Marhu also came out of the woods, holding some mineral water, some food, and a few packs of cigarettes in their hands. Everyone was surprised to see them take out so many things. They didn't expect them to hide so many things. The 2 ignored everyone's eyes and walked up to Zhou Chuyu and said to him, "How about I trade these for your remaining coconuts and lobsters?" Zhou Chuyu took a look at these things and said with a smile, "Except for the cigarettes, which are somewhat useful to me, I don't need the mineral water and food. You want to exchange these little things for so many things like lobsters. Do you 2 think I am really stupid or just pretending to be stupid?" Hearing him say this carelessly, he was somewhat dissatisfied. "Just tell me what you want to change," Zhou Chuyu said with a smile. "Didn't I see you had a knife and an axe? If you had these things, I can return these coconuts and lobsters to you." Hearing him say this, Liu Hainan said with some caution. You're not going to use your knife and axe against us now, are you? Zhou Chuyu said with a smile. Do I need knives and axes to deal with you? After hearing what he said, Liu Hainan and the others thought that this made sense. They also thought that there was no use keeping the axe and knife, so it would be better to exchange them for some coconuts and lobsters. Liu Hainan immediately asked Marhu to bring the knife and the axe. Soon Marhu came over with the knife and the axe and threw them directly in front of Zhou Chuyu's feet. Liu Hainan also put the things in his hands on the ground. Zhou Chuyu said with a smile. These lobsters and coconuts are all yours. You can come to me to exchange them for good things in the future. He deliberately raised his voice when saying this, just for the people present to hear. He had no idea what else these people were hiding. After hearing what he said, Liu Hainan suddenly said to him. You picked those coconuts and hid them. Before Zhou Chuyu could speak, Ding Xue said. What nonsense are you talking about? These coconuts were found by Brother Zhu and I in the woods. There is a large area of coconut trees there. Hearing her say this, Zhou Chuyu hurriedly said loudly. Xiexue, what are you talking about? Where are there coconuts in the woods? After hearing what he said, Ding Xue said with some dissatisfaction. Aren't there a lot of coconut trees in the woods? I didn't say anything nonsense. After saying that, he lowered his head pretending to be very angry. The two began to act again. After hearing their conversation, Liu Hainan said to Ding Xue with a smile. Where is that piece of coconut you mentioned? Ding Xue said without hesitation. It's easy to find in the woods. It only takes a little over an hour to get there from here. As soon as she finished speaking, Zhou Chuyu shouted. Can you please stop talking and pack up your things and go back? Ding Xue reluctantly put the things she had exchanged into a woven bag. Zhou Chuyu carried the woven bag on his shoulder, took Ding Xue's hand and walked away. Seeing the two people leave, Liu Hainan couldn't help but laugh and said loudly. Xiao Zhu is the same. He didn't even share the coconut trees in the woods. Luckily, Ding Xue didn't have the guts to tell him. We'll go pick coconuts tomorrow. Hearing him say this, everyone agreed, except Bai Ruolan, who looked at him with some disdain, thinking, you fool, you don't even know that you've been fooled by Zhou Chuyu and Ding Xue again. Chapter 16 Joining Zhou Chuyu. Seeing that Liu Hainan and his friend had exchanged so many lobsters and coconuts, many people gathered around them and shouted at them to share the coconuts and lobsters with them. Liu Hainan said loudly to everyone. You can eat it if you want, but you have to exchange it with the things you have hidden away. Marhu also continued. My cousin is right. If you want to eat coconuts and lobsters, you have to exchange them for something. I thought you were all very honest, but I didn't expect you all hid things. After hearing what the two said, many people started to discuss it. At this time, a girl suddenly said to Liu Hainan. I haven't hidden anything, can you give me something to eat? Liu Hainan looked her up and down and said with a smile. It's not impossible, but it depends on how you do it. There is no free lunch in the world. The girl also understood what he meant instantly and didn't know what to do for a moment. Seeing this, Bai Ruolan immediately stood up and said to the girl. You don't need to ask him, he just wants to take advantage of you, come here and let me share some of my food with you. The girl immediately walked up to Bai Ruo, gave her a grilled lobster, and also gave her a coconut. The girl thanked Bai Ruolan repeatedly, picked up the grilled lobster, peeled off the shell, stuffed it into her mouth and began to eat it voraciously. Seeing that Bai Ruolan had ruined his good fortune, Liu Hainan said to her loudly. Bai Ruolan, what does this have to do with you? Bai Ruolan raised her head and looked at him and said calmly. I can give my own food to whoever I want to eat, but you, everyone nominated you to be the leader, and let you lead us to survive here, but you not only hid the food for yourself, but also took advantage of the situation after getting food. Is there anyone like you who can be a boss? After hearing what Bai Ruolan said, many people began to complain about Liu Hainan. Liu Hainan was so angry that his teeth itched when Bai Ruolan scolded him. Seeing that everyone was blaming him, he suddenly changed his face and said with a smile. I was just joking with you guys. How could I do such a thing? I will share these coconuts and lobsters with everyone right now. After he finished talking, he started distributing lobsters and coconuts to everyone. After getting the lobsters and coconuts, this group of people started to flatter Liu Hainan again. Bai Ruolan thought that these people really changed their faces faster than turning pages of a book just for a little food. Liu Hainan looked at Bai Ruolan fiercely, wondering what bad things he was thinking. Bai Ruolan saw Liu Hainan staring at her, and suddenly a bad feeling came over her. She knew that what she had just said had offended Liu Hainan. She also knew that if she stayed here any longer, Liu Hainan might do something to her. The best way now was to seek refuge with Zhou Chuyu. Only he could protect her and allow her to live here. After finishing the lobster in his hand, he drank the coconut milk in one gulp, stood up and walked into the woods with the girl. Seeing this, Marhu quickly said to her, "What are you two doing?" Bai Ruolan said unhappily, "We're going to the bathroom, do you want to come with us?" Hearing her say this, Marhu didn't say anything else. Bai Ruolan pulled the girl into the woods, then let go of her hand and said to her, "I feel like it's not safe here anymore. If we stay here any longer, we'll be in trouble by Liu Hainan and Marhu sooner or later. I plan to go and seek refuge with Zhou Chuyu. Do you want to come with me?" This girl is actually a small anchor. Naturally, she cannot be compared with big anchors like Bai Ruolan and Song Yushi. She is a little-known anchor. She also knows that if she stays here, she will be bullied by Liu Hainan and Marhu sooner or later. She quickly said to Bai Ruolan, "I'm willing to go with you to seek refuge with Zhou Chuyu. Or why don't we call Song Yushi along too? I've noticed that Liu Hainan has been staring at her almost every day these days. I'm afraid she'll be bullied." Bai Ruolan nodded and said, "I'll go ask her later. If she doesn't want to leave with us, there's nothing we can do." The two then returned to the shore. Seeing the two coming back, Liu Nan revealed a barely perceptible smile at the corner of his mouth. Bai Ruolan had already embarrassed her just now, so he planned to trick Bai Ruolan into the woods tonight and teach her a lesson. Bai Ruolan and the other girl pretended nothing had happened and sat down by the fire. After everyone had finished eating, she spoke to Song Yushi and the girl. "Let's take a walk on the beach." After she finished speaking, she stood up and walked towards the coast. Song Yushi and the girl also stood up and followed her. When they arrived at the coast, the three of them just walked along the coast. After walking for dozens of meters, Bai Ruolan told Song Yushi that she wanted to join Zhou Chuyu, and asked Song Yushi if she was willing to leave with her. Hearing Bai Ruolan say this, Song Yushi said hesitantly, "Can Zhou Chuyu really lead us to survive here? You also saw how he treated Ding Shui. If we go to him for help, we will be bullied to death by him." Bai Ruolan said with a smile, "Didn't you see that they were acting? If Zhou Chuyu really bullied Ding Shui, she would have run away long ago. Why would she follow him so devotedly? And those coconuts were picked and hidden by the two of them. You were all deceived, you know that." After hearing her say this, Song Yushi thought back to the 2 days she lived with Zhou Chuyu, and how he had never bullied her. So she agreed to go with her to join Zhou Chuyu. The three of them immediately quickened their pace and walked towards where Zhou Chuyu lived. Liu Hainan and Marhu also saw the three people gradually walking away. Marhu said to Liu Hainan, "Cousin, do you think the three of them are going to seek refuge with Zhou Chuyu?" Hearing him say this, Liu Hainan immediately shouted, "Oh no! The three of them are trying to run away. Hurry up and chase them." After saying that, he chased after the three people, and Marhu followed closely behind. At this time, Bai Ruolan and the other two also saw Liu Hainan and Marhu chasing them. Bai Ruolan quickly said to the two of them, "Run quickly. It will be troublesome if they catch up with us." After saying that, he ran towards the distance desperately. Song Yushi and the girl also started running wildly. At this time, the three of them were still several hundred meters away from Liu Hainan and the other person. But there was no way the three girls could outrun the two big men Liu Hainan, so they could only run forward desperately. They also knew what would happen to them if they were caught. After running for more than half an hour, everyone was exhausted. Liu Hainan and Marhu were less than 100 meters away from the three people. At this time, Bai Ruolan and the other two also saw Zhou Chuyu and Ding Shui's shelter, and they started shouting as they ran. Chapter 17, Action. At this time, Zhou Chuyu and Ding Shui were chatting and laughing in the shelter. They were extremely happy looking at the things they had exchanged today. At this time, Bai Ruolan's shouting was suddenly heard from the coast. The two immediately walked out of the shelter and saw from afar Bai Ruolan and the other two running towards them. Behind them were Liu Hainan and Marhu who were chasing them relentlessly. Zhou Chuyu and the other person also ran quickly towards the coast, and soon they ran in front of the three people. Seeing Zhou Chuyu finally appear, Bai Ruolan and the other two collapsed on the beach, gasping for breath. Soon Liu Hainan and Marhu also ran up to the group. Zhou Chuyu looked at them coldly and asked, "What are you doing?" Before Liu Hainan could speak, Bai Ruolan said breathlessly, "Please take us in. We don't want to be caught by Liu Hainan." After hearing what she said, Zhou Chuyu seemed to understand what was going on. He then stared at Liu Hainan and asked, "What are you two planning to do?" When Zhou Chuyu looked at him like this, Liu Hainan felt as if he was being stared at by a poisonous snake. He felt uncomfortable all over and didn't dare to look directly into his eyes, but he still said loudly, "These three are my people. They left without permission and I am taking them back." Hearing Liu Hainan say this, Zhou Chuyu couldn't help but sneer and said to Bai Ruolan and the other two, "He said that the three of you were his people. Is that true?" Bai Ruolan and the other two quickly shook their heads. Zhou Chuyu said to Liu Hainan again, "You see, they all say they are not yours, so you should leave now." Hearing Zhou Chuyu say this, Liu Hainan and Marhu didn't move at all and just stood there. You know, Bai Ruolan and the other two were the most beautiful among their group, and Liu Hainan naturally didn't want to just watch them being with Zhou Chuyu. Seeing that the two did not move, Zhou Chuyu said loudly to them, "Why is it that my words don't work? Or are you deaf? Can't you understand what I'm saying when I tell you to leave quickly?" After hearing what he said, Liu Hainan raised his head and said to him, "Xiao Zhu, I advise you to mind your own business. I will definitely take these three away today. Don't think I'm afraid of you just because you are good at fighting. I am not a pushover either." After saying that, he stared at Zhou Chuyu coldly. Marhu also clenched his fists and said to him, "Xiao Zhu, I have tolerated you for a long time. I advise you to be honest and let me take them away, otherwise I will fight you to the death." Hearing him say this, Zhou Chuyu couldn't help but burst into laughter and said to the two of them, "I want to see what you can do to me." After saying that, he kicked towards Liu Hainan with lightning speed, but Liu Hainan was prepared and quickly dodged his kick. Zhou Chuyu couldn't help but smile and said, "No wonder you're so tough, I didn't realize you have some tricks up your sleeve." Before Liu Hainan could speak, Marhu smiled and said, "Do you think my cousin is a vegetarian? He used to be a free-fighting champion. The reason he didn't fight with you is that he didn't want to argue with you." Hearing him say this, Zhou Chuyu laughed again. "What a free-fighting champion! I want to see how strong you are." When Bai Ruolan and the others saw this scene, they immediately got up from the ground and hid far away. At this time, they were extremely worried, fearing that Zhou Chuyu was no match for Liu Hainan and Marhu. Zhou Chuyu kicked Liu Hainan quickly again, but before kicking Liu Hainan, he changed direction and kicked towards Marhu. Marhu did not expect that Zhou Chuyu's kick would change direction. By the time he reacted, it was too late. Zhou Chuyu kicked him hard in the chest. Zhou Chuyu used all his strength in this kick and kicked Marhu 3 or 4 meters away, and he fell heavily on the beach. At this moment, Marhu felt as if everything was falling apart. He struggled for several times but couldn't get up from the ground. When Liu Hainan saw Marhu fall to the ground, he immediately attacked Zhou Chuyu. Although he was able to get out of the circle at an extremely fast speed, Zhou Chuyu easily resolved it. In less than half a minute, he was already at a disadvantage. Zhou Chuyu seized the opportunity and punched him in the chest. This punch knocked Liu Hainan to the ground, and he couldn't get up for a while. Zhou Chuyu didn't continue to attack him, and put away his fist and said disdainfully, "Is this the level of a free-fighting champion?" Being ridiculed by him like this, Liu Hainan suddenly became furious and spat out blood from his mouth. Seeing this, Zhou Chuyu smiled and said, "You just got punched, why are you vomiting blood? I'm telling you, don't blackmail me." Hearing Zhou Chuyu say this, Liu Hainan became even more angry. He originally thought that he could fight on equal terms with him, but he didn't expect that he would be so vulnerable in front of him. His fear of him became stronger and stronger. After a while, he asked, "Who are you? How come you are so powerful?" Zhou Chuyu said with a smile, "I am who I am. I am just a security guard. Do you still want to take them away now? Or do you want to get up and keep fighting?" Liu Hainan no longer dared to fight him. Although he was unwilling, he had no choice but to give up. He struggled to get up from the ground and said to Zhou Chuyu, "I admit that you are powerful, and I am no match for you, but don't worry, I will definitely come back to find you." After he finished speaking, he glared at Bai Ruolan and the other two and said, "I'm going to let the three of you go today. Don't worry, as long as you stay on this island for one day, You will all be mine sooner or later. Hearing that he was still being stubborn and even threatening by Ruolan and the other two in front of him, Zhou Chuyu immediately became furious. The person he hated most in his life was people like Liu Hainan. Then he raised his foot and kicked Liu Hainan hard on the chest. This kick directly kicked Liu Hainan several meters away and he fell heavily to the ground again. Zhou Chuyu said loudly, "Get out of here. If you dare to say another word, I will kill you right now, do you believe it?" Liu Hainan didn't dare to say anything else. He took great effort to get up from the ground, and he and Marhu supported each other and walked away. Seeing the two of them leave, Bai Ruolan immediately walked up to him and said with a smile, "Brother Zhu, you are so awesome. I didn't expect that it would be so easy to teach them a lesson. I will definitely not be bullied if I follow you in the future." Zhou Chuyu rolled his eyes at her and said, "You don't have to flatter me. I've already chased them away. You can leave now." Hearing Zhou Chuyu say this, Bai Ruolan and the other two were stunned. Bai Ruolan smiled and said, "Brother Zhu, won't you take us in?" Zhou Chuyu shook his head and said, "Give me a reason to take you in. I don't want to bring you three along as a burden. I feel like Xiexue and I are doing pretty well together now." The three of them looked at each other, and for a moment they couldn't think of a reason for Zhou Chuyu to take them in. At this time, the girl who came with Bai Ruolan suddenly walked up to Zhou Chuyu and said pitifully, "Brother Zhu, please take us in. Look how pitiful we are. If you take us in, we will be caught by Liu Hainan sooner or later. Can you bear to watch the three of us being bullied?" Hearing her speak like this, Zhou Chuyu suddenly felt goosebumps all over his body, and hurriedly said to her, Stop talking. I can't stand you talking like that. I haven't even asked you who you are yet." The girl said quickly, "Brother Zhu, my name is Ruiying, you can also call me Yingying." Chapter 18 Taking in Song Yushi and the other two. After hearing what she said, Zhou Chuyu looked at Bai Ruolan and Song Yushi again, and then he spoke. "It's not impossible for me to take you in, but I can't take you in for nothing." Hearing him say this, Song Yushi immediately covered her chest and said to him, "What do you want to do? I tell you the truth, if you want to exchange our bodies, we would rather leave here." Zhou Chuyu glared at her fiercely and said, "Who do you think I am? I don't even like your body." After hearing what he said, Song Yushi felt relieved and said to him, "Then what do you want us to do?" Zhou Chuyu smiled and said, "I won't let you do anything. But you have to listen to me and help me with the work. If you agree, you can stay." Hearing him say this, Bai Ruolan and the other two quickly nodded in agreement, and promised to listen to him in the future. If he told them to go east, they would never go west. Now that there are three more people, Zhou Chuyu feels that his pressure is getting greater and greater. If he were alone, he could live well here, even with Ding Shui, he wouldn't feel any pressure. But now with Bai Ruolan and three more people, Zhou Chuyu also felt the pressure. The most important thing right now was to find a water source and build a shelter. Although he had hidden a lot of coconuts, these coconuts would not last long. Besides, he was planning to use these coconuts to exchange for things with Liu Hainan and his group. As for the mineral water and food he exchanged from Liu Hainan, they were hidden by him and Ding Shui. He would not take out these food and water unless it was absolutely necessary. He sat by the fire and smoked a cigarette, then went to the reef with a sharpened wooden stick, took off his clothes and pants, jumped into the sea and started catching lobsters. Seeing Zhou Chuyu jump into the sea, Rui Ying said to Ding Shui in confusion, "Why did Brother Zhu jump into the sea?" Ding Shui said with a smile, "He went to catch Longxi." After hearing her say this, Song Yushi spoke again. "Can you catch lobsters this way?" Ding Shui nodded and said, "Of course, where else would we get the lobsters to trade for things? Brother Zhu is really awesome." At this time, Song Yushi said to Ding Shui again, "I see he's either beating you or yelling at you, why are you still so nice to him?" Ding Shui smiled and said, "Where did Brother Zhu scold me? We were just acting for you." After hearing what Ding Shui said, Song Yushi finally believed what Bai Ruolan said. Only then did she realize that she had wronged Zhou Chuyu. After more than an hour, Zhou Chuyu finally used a wooden stick to fork more than 10 lobsters, climbed onto the reef, put on his clothes, and returned to the fire with the lobsters. Ding Shui found a wooden stick and pulled out some charcoal from the fire, then put the lobster on it and started roasting it. Zhou Chuyu came to the place where coconuts were hidden again, dug some coconuts, put them in his clothes and brought them back to the fire. Then he took out a knife, split the coconuts in half and gave one to everyone. Looking at the coconut in her hand, Rui Ying asked again. Brother Zhu, is there really a large coconut forest in the woods? Hearing her ask this, Zhou Chuyu, Ding Shui and Bai Ruolan all laughed. Bai Ruolan smiled and said, Yingyin, you are so stupid. Brother Zhu and Xiaoxue said that on purpose for Liu Hainan and the others to hear. Zhou Chuyu glanced at Bai Ruolan and smiled. You are so smart. Nothing can be hidden from you. After hearing what Bai Ruolan said, Song Yushi and Rui Ying finally realized what was going on. Song Yushi asked stupidly again. Why did you tell them that on purpose? Zhou Chuyu then smiled and said. I did this to make them believe there were coconuts in the woods. That way, they would spend a lot of time looking for coconuts and would have no time to look for food. When they were hungry, I would take coconuts and lobsters to them to exchange for other things. Who knows how much they have hidden? After hearing what he said, Rui Ying asked again. You are so skilled. Why don't you just rob them? I believe that if you just make a move, they will obediently hand over their hidden possessions. Zhou Chuyu glared at her fiercely and said. If I go to rob, then what's the difference between me and a bandit? Who do you think I am? I am a person with a strong sense of justice. Hearing him say this, Bai Ruolan couldn't help but laugh. Do you think you have a strong sense of justice? I think you are just an old fox. You have more tricks than Liu Hainan and his men combined. They have been fooled by you. If they knew there were no coconuts in the forest, they would curse your ancestors for generations. Zhou Chuyu said indifferently. I'm only doing this to survive. Let them scold me as much as they want. I can't hear them anyway. Soon the lobsters were grilled, and several people picked up the grilled lobsters, peeled off the shells, stuffed them into their mouths and started to eat them with relish. After eating the lobster, the sun was about to set, and Zhou Chuyu took an axe and chopped some firewood in the woods. Now that he had a knife and an axe, everything was more convenient. Since the shelter built by the two was relatively small, and now that Song Yushi and 3 other girls had joined in, the shelter seemed crowded. Zhou Chuyu could only let the girls sleep in the shelter, while he cut some palm leaves and laid them at the door of the shelter. The few of them chatted until very late and then fell asleep on the palm leaves. Liu Hainan and Marhu supported each other and it took them almost 2 hours to get back to the fire. Looking at their appearance, everyone knew that they must have been taught a lesson by Zhou Chuyu. No one dared to speak anymore. Liu Hainan and Marhu were filled with rage at this time. They had originally planned to deal with Bai Ruolan tonight, but they didn't expect that she would run away. Sitting under a big tree, Marhu took out a cigarette from his pocket, took out one and handed it to Liu Hainan, then lit it for him and lit one for himself and took a few puffs. Some complained. Cousin, if you had listened to me and taken down Bai Ruolan and Song Yushi earlier, today's incident wouldn't have happened. Now look what happened. The cooked duck just escaped and we both got beaten up. Liu Hainan was also full of regret. If he had known that the 3 of them would run away, he would have captured them early as Marhu said. But it was too late to say anything now. Liu Hainan threw the cigarette but to the ground fiercely and said angrily. Just wait and see. One day I will catch them back. As for Zhou Chuyu, I will make him pay for what he did today. After saying that, he looked at the women sitting in the distance. Although these women were not as beautiful as Bai Ruolan and the others, they were still pretty good. Seeing him like this, Marhu immediately said excitedly. Cousin, why don't we find 2 people tonight to do it? If these guys get away too, it will be a waste of time. Hearing him say this, Liu Hainan nodded. Chapter 19 Moving away from the beach. So when it was dark, Liu Hainan and Marhu tricked 2 women who looked pretty good and walked into the woods. The 2 women also knew what would happen, but they had no choice but to obey the 2 men in order to survive. Liu Hainan and Marhu vented all their anger on these 2 women. Nearly half an hour passed like this before a few people returned to the fire. Looking at the 2 women in tattered clothes, everyone knew what had happened, but no one dared to say anything. Liu Hainan also specially gave each of the 2 women a bottle of water and some food. This was to tell the others that if they wanted to live here they must listen to him. Early the next morning, Liu Hainan and Marhu called a few men to go into the woods to look for coconuts, since someone was bitten to death by a poisonous snake in the woods yesterday. Everyone was filled with fear of the woods, but they were also extremely afraid of Liu Hainan and Marhu, so they could only follow the 2 into the woods to look for coconuts. This time everyone was extremely cautious. They wandered around in the woods for 3 or 4 hours but did not find any coconuts. It was not until the afternoon that they returned to the shore, panting. They all collapsed on the ground and started cursing. Seeing that there was no food to be found, they could only go to the shore to pick up some clams and conches to roast and eat. Another day passed like this, and the next morning Liu Hainan took a group of people to the woods to look for coconuts. It was obvious that no coconuts were found. On the third morning, when Liu Hainan called them to go find coconuts again, no one was willing to go. Seeing that no one was willing to go, Liu Hainan said loudly to everyone, "Since you don't want to go, then Marhu and I will go. If we find coconuts, you can't eat them." After saying that, he took Marhu and walked towards the woods. In the past 2 days, they had searched almost all the nearby woods, but there was no trace of coconuts. Marhu suddenly said to Liu Hainan, "Cousin, maybe there are no coconuts in this forest at all. Could it be that Ding Shui and Zhou Chuyu teamed up to deceive us?" Liu Hainan shook his head and said, "I don't think so. If there were no coconuts in the forest, Zhou Chuyu wouldn't have treated Ding Shui like that." After hearing what he said, Marhu didn't say anything else, and the two of them continued looking for coconuts in the woods. Seeing Liu Hainan and Marhu walk into the woods, a man suddenly stood up and walked into the woods, and soon came out with some things. He walked towards the shelter where Zhou Chuyu and others lived. Judging from the way he looked, he should be going to Zhou Chuyu to exchange food. After the first one, there was the second one. One after another, people stood up and walked towards the woods. When they came out, every one of them had something in their hands and walked towards the shelter where Zhou Chuyu and others lived. Those who didn't hide anything could only watch everyone leave with envy on their faces. At this time, Zhou Chuyu and a few others were sitting by the fire, eating grilled lobsters and drinking coconut milk. In the past 2 days, Zhou Chuyu caught a lot of lobsters with his bare hands and raised them in a deep pit. After they had finished their breakfast, Bai Ruolan looked up and saw some people walking towards them. She then said to Zhou Chuyu, "Brother Zhu, look, someone is coming." Zhou Chuyu looked up and saw these people, then smiled and said, "It's time for business. Xieshue, take them to get some coconuts." After saying that, he walked towards the group of people. When he walked up to the group of people, he looked at what they were holding and pretended not to see it and said to them, "What are you doing here?" Hearing him ask this, the group of people took out their things and asked Zhou Chuyu to exchange some lobsters and coconuts for them to eat. Looking at the things in everyone's hands, Zhou Chuyu's eyes suddenly lit up. The things they brought were almost everything, including cigarettes and lighters, some medicines and cosmetics, and some toiletries. Looking at so many things in his hands, Zhou Chuyu said expressionlessly, "Do you have anything else?" After hearing what he said, the group of people shook their heads to indicate that they had nothing left. Zhou Chuyu thought that these people probably didn't have anything left either. Soon, Ding Shui and a few others brought over some coconuts in woven bags and dumped them directly on the beach. Zhou Chuyu then removed the woven bag covering the deep pit, and the lobsters inside were revealed to everyone. Seeing so many coconuts and lobsters, everyone's eyes lit up and they took out things to exchange. Zhou Chuyu was also very happy to exchange with these people. After getting the lobsters and coconuts, these people left happily. Zhou Chuyu then asked Ding Shui and others to move all the things they had exchanged back to the shelter. After today's exchange, Zhou Chuyu only had a few coconuts left. It seemed that he should leave here. Anyway, he had so many things now. As long as he found a water source, he could concentrate on building a shelter. After dinner, Zhou Chuyu said to the others, "I plan to go to the woods to look for water tomorrow. You guys stay here and don't run around. If we find water, we'll move away." Hearing him say this, Song Yushi asked in confusion, "Brother Zhu, isn't it good for us to stay here by the sea? And there are lobsters to eat here, why do we have to move away?" Zhou Chuyu glanced at her and said, "After today's exchange, there aren't many coconuts left that Xieshue and I have hidden. They are only enough for us to eat for 2 or 3 days at most. If there's no fresh water, we'll die of thirst here." Bai Ruolan said to him again, "Brother Zhu, why don't we go with you? What should we do if Liu Hainan and Marhu find us after you leave? Besides, we are not sure if you go alone." Hearing her say this, Zhou Chuyu felt that it made sense. If Liu Hainan and the others suddenly came after he left, these girls would be in trouble. After a little thought, he said to everyone, "Okay then. We'll take these things up there and look for water tomorrow morning. If we can find water, that'll be great. If not, we'll come back." Zhou Chuyu woke up early the next morning. He first went to the coast to find a few woven bags and put all the things he had exchanged into the woven bags. I found a few empty bottles, cleaned them with sea water, split open some coconuts, and poured the coconut juice into the empty bottles. He picked up some plastic bags, tore them apart and distributed them to several people, asking them to tie up their sleeves and trouser legs. Each person carried a woven bag and walked towards the woods. The woods were full of towering trees, dense bushes, and some thorny bushes covered with barbs. Each person carried a woven bag, so walking was quite difficult and they had to pay attention to the surrounding environment at all times. They walked and stopped like this for 2 or 3 hours before they walked 3 or 4 kilometers. At this time, everyone was sweating and panting. By Ruolan and several other girls' shoulders and soles of feet were bleeding, but they were all gritting their teeth and persevering. Zhou Chuyu felt distressed when he saw this, so he found a vacant space, cleared the weeds and leaves on the ground, and let the girls sit on the ground to rest. He then handed coconut juice in empty bottles from the woven bag to a few people, and handed a knife and an axe to a few people, and continued to walk into the woods. Chapter 20 Finding Water. Zhou Chuyu continued walking towards the depths of the dense forest with a wooden stick in his hand. After walking for nearly an hour, he faintly heard the sound of flowing water, and he couldn't help but feel happy. Then he quickened his pace and walked quickly towards the direction of the water flow. As he got closer, the sound of the water flow became clearer and clearer. After walking forward for a few hundred meters, a small river more than 2 meters wide appeared in front of us. The river was about 2 meters deep and the water was clear. There were many animal footprints beside the river, and there were some small fish more than 1 finger long swimming around at the bottom of the river. Judging from the low terrain of this river, it should be formed by rainwater, but it is unknown where the fish in the river come from. Although the river water was crystal clear, Zhou Chuyu knew that there were a lot of parasites and bacteria in the water, so he didn't dare to drink it rashly. Then he turned around and ran towards Ding Shui and the others. It took him less than an hour to get to them. He said to them breathlessly, "I found a water source, hurry up and pack up and go over there." Hearing that he had found the water source, everyone was extremely happy and excited. They picked up their woven bags and followed Zhou Chuyu towards the stream. It took more than an hour before they finally arrived at the river. They put the woven bags on the ground and looked at the clear water. Several girls ran to the river and put their heads over to drink the water. Zhou Chuyu saw this and said to them, "You can't drink this water. Although it looks clean, there are countless bacteria and parasites in it. If you drink it, you will definitely get an upset stomach. You must boil it before drinking it." Hearing him say this, several girls quickly retracted their heads. Zhou Chuyu picked up some dry grass and firewood on the ground and lit a fire directly beside the stream. He then took a pot made of a paint bucket, filled it with river water, put it on the fire and started to cook. After the water boiled and cooled, Zhou Chuyu took out a few bottles, cut them in half and distributed them to several people. The girls also picked up the cut bottles, scooped up the water in the pot and started drinking. After drinking the water, Zhou Chuyu asked the girls to stay where they were, while he planned to find a suitable place to build a shelter. We walked along the stream for several hundred meters and finally saw an open space on higher ground beside the stream. There were relatively few animal footprints here, so it was perfect for building shelter. Moreover, there are some bamboos as thick as bowls growing by the small river not far away. These bamboos are perfect for building shelters. He quickly walked back to Bai Ruolan and the others, asked them to bring their things with him, and came to the open space where the shelter was built. Everyone put the woven bags on the ground, and Zhou Chuyu picked up some firewood and lit a fire on the open space. It was already afternoon. They had not eaten anything the whole day and had been walking in the woods for several hours carrying woven bags. They were already starving. Fortunately, Zhou Chuyu brought a plastic bag of lobsters from the coast when he came. He took out the lobsters, put them on the fire and started roasting them. When the lobsters were grilled, several people couldn't wait to pick up the lobsters, break off the shells, stuff them into their mouths and start eating them voraciously. After eating the grilled lobster, the few people finally recovered some strength. Zhou Chuyu asked the girls to collect some firewood, while he took a knife and went to the woods to cut some palm leaves, carried them back to the fire, and spread a thick layer on the ground. Ding Shui and the others also picked up a lot of firewood. It was getting dark, and it was impossible to build a shelter today. For the safety of everyone, Zhou Chuyu cut some thorny bushes and placed them around the open space. Seeing that it was getting completely dark, Zhou Chuyu lit several fires around the open space. Perhaps because they were too tired, the girls went to sleep on the palm leaves early. Although they had lit several bonfires, there were many mosquitoes here. The girls were bitten and had many large lumps on their bodies. They could not fall asleep for a long time. Seeing this, Zhou Chuyu suddenly remembered that he seemed to have exchanged coconut and lobster for 2 bottles of toilet water yesterday. He then poured out the contents of several woven bags and started searching. Soon they found 2 bottles of floral water and handed them to Ding Shui and the others, asking them to spray them on their bodies. Ding Shui and the others picked up the floral water and sprayed it on themselves. After spraying the floral water, the number of mosquitoes indeed decreased a lot, and they fell asleep one after another. Zhou Chuyu did not dare to be careless at all. He sat by the fire with a knife in his hand, guarding the girls until midnight. Bai Ruolan woke up to go to the toilet and took over his watch. Only then did he lie down on the palm leaves and fall asleep. Although he fell asleep at midnight last night, Zhou Chuyu woke up at dawn the next morning and saw Bai Ruolan still sitting by the fire with red and swollen eyes. Zhou Chuyu quickly asked him to lie down and rest, while he stood up and stretched his muscles. Soon Ding Shui woke up. Since the lobsters brought from the coast yesterday had been eaten, the few people had no food left. Zhou Chuyu asked Ding Shui to look after Song Yushi and the other 2 who were still sleeping, while he took a knife and a sharpened wooden stick and walked into the woods. He wandered in the woods for nearly half an hour. The sun had already risen and the calls of pheasants could be heard from the branches from time to time. But without a bow and arrow, Zhou Chuyu had no way to deal with them. After walking forward for a while, they suddenly heard an animal scream from the woods not far away. Zhou Chuyu listened carefully and knew that the scream came from a wild boar. Holding the knife, he walked quickly towards the direction where the wild boar was screaming. After walking more than 200 meters, he saw a wild boar weighing 30 or 40 kilograms, entangled by some vines. The wild boar was still trying desperately to break free from the vines, but the more it struggled, the tighter the vines wrapped around it. Seeing this scene, Zhou Chuyu couldn't help but laugh out loud. I thought it would be difficult to find food, but I didn't expect this wild boar to come to me on its own initiative. Then I quickly ran towards the wild boar entangled by the vines. Seeing Zhou Chuyu approaching, the wild boar screamed even louder and struggled harder and harder. Zhou Chuyu was not going to tolerate it. He picked up a sharpened wooden stick and stabbed it hard into its neck. The moment the wooden stick was pulled out, the wild boar let out another scream, and a stream of blood gushed out from its neck. As the blood continued to flow out, the wild boar slowly fell down, and the screams became smaller and smaller, and soon there was no sound at all. Seeing that the wild boar was completely dead, Zhou Chuyu took out a knife, cut off the vines wrapped around it, picked up the wild boar and walked quickly towards the river. Chapter 21 Building a Shelter. When they returned to the river, Song Yushi and the others had all woken up and were sitting by the fire. When they saw that he had carried back such a big wild boar, they were all shocked and stood up and walked towards him. Zhou Chuyu threw the wild boar to the ground, then sat down on the ground and gasped heavily. At this moment, he was covered in sweat, and his clothes were completely soaked with sweat. Bai Ruolan immediately picked up a cut mineral water bottle, filled some boiled water from the pot and handed it to him. After taking the boiled water and drinking it all, she sat on the ground and gasped. Rui Ying said with surprise, "Brother Zhu, you are so amazing. You actually brought back such a big wild boar." Zhou Chuyu smiled. "I was just lucky. This wild boar was entangled by the vines, so I was able to get it back." After sitting on the ground and resting for a while, he stood up and dragged the wild boar to the river. He took a few people to find some dry grass to cover the wild boar, and took out a lighter to light the dry grass. As the dry grass burned, the smell of burnt pig hair instantly wafted into the air. Several girls covered their mouths and noses with their hands. When the dry grass was burned out, the hair on the wild boar's body had also been burned clean. Zhou Chuyu directly took the wild boar into the stream and started to clean it. After cleaning it, he took out a knife and cut a hole in its belly. He directly took out the internal organs and cut off the liver. He threw the other parts into the stream and let the water wash them away. He picked up a knife and started cutting up the wild boar meat. After all the meat was cut up, he took it to the fire and placed it on palm leaves. He then took the pot to the river, filled it with water, placed it on the fire, took a piece of wild boar meat, cut it into small pieces, put it in the pot and started stewing it. Looking at the remaining wild boar meat, there were already a lot of flies and flying insects flying around on it. I thought that if the meat was not handled in time, it would easily rot and deteriorate. He stood up and walked to the small river where bamboos grew. He cut a few bamboos as thick as his arms and carried them back to the fire. He then cut the bamboos into small pieces. He then went to the woods and carried back some rattan. He used these bamboos to make a bamboo rack. He went to the woods again and cut some pine branches and put them on the bamboo rack. He put all the remaining wild boar meat on the pine branches and covered it with another layer of pine branches. He then dug some still burning charcoal from the fire and put it under the bamboo rack. He then cut some more pine branches and put them on top of the charcoal and started to smoke the wild boar meat. From the moment he started processing the wild boar meat, the girls could hardly help at all. But when they saw him using pine branches to smoke the wild boar meat, the girls admired him even more. By the time he finished all these, the wild boar meat in the pot had already given off a fragrant aroma. Zhou Chuyu took out a knife and used a wooden stick to cut a few pairs of chopsticks and handed them to the people. The girls also picked up the stewed wild boar meat in the pot, stuffed it into their mouths and began to eat it voraciously. After eating the meat, Zhou Chuyu took a few girls to the river to cut bamboos needed to build the shelter. Zhou Chuyu was responsible for chopping down the bamboo with an axe. Ding Shui and Song Yushi used knives to cut off the branches and leaves on the bamboo, and Bai Ruolan and Rui Ying were responsible for carrying the bamboo back to the open space for building the shelter. Except Ding Shui, the other three girls had never done any physical work. After a day's work, all three of them felt sore all over. However, they also knew that if they wanted to survive here, they had to work, so they gritted their teeth and persevered. When it was almost dark, the few people finally cut a lot of bamboo and carried it back to the open space to build the shelter, but these bamboos were far from enough to build the shelter. Zhou Chuyu took some wild boar ribs, chopped them into small pieces, and stewed them in the pot. Zhou Chuyu also took a piece of bamboo as thick as a bowl and made a few bamboo bowls. When the ribs were stewed, several people picked up the ribs and put them in their mouths and started to eat with relish. A big pot of stewed pork ribs was eaten up by several people in a short time, and in the end there was not even a drop of soup left. After eating the stewed pork ribs, Ding Shui volunteered to keep watch tonight, while Song Yushi and the other two applied some floral water on their bodies and lay down on the palm leaves to sleep. Zhou Chuyu didn't fall asleep until midnight last night, and he woke up early this morning. He was already very sleepy. He told Ding Shui to wake him up if there was any movement, and then he lay down on the palm leaves and fell asleep. When he woke up, it was already the next morning. Rui Ying was now sitting by the fire. It turned out that last night, Rui Ying was woken up by the urge to pee in the middle of the night. She got up to go to the toilet and then replaced Ding Shui to keep watch. Seeing Zhou Chuyu wake up, Rui Ying greeted him with a smile. Seeing Rui Ying's haggard appearance, Zhou Chuyu asked her to lie down and rest for a while. He then pulled out some still burning charcoal from the fire, placed it under the bamboo rack, and cut some pine branches to cover the charcoal. After a day of smoking, the wild boar meat on the bamboo rack has become dehydrated a lot and there is no sign of rotting or deterioration. He went to the river, washed his face, picked up the axe and went back to the river to chop bamboo. 2 more days passed like this, and with the efforts of several people, they finally cut down a large pile of bamboos, which were more than enough to build a shelter. On the morning of the 3rd day, after cooking some wild boar meat and eating it, several people began to build a shelter. Zhou Chuyu took a few girls to dig some pits nearly half a meter deep in the open space with wooden sticks. Although they didn't have any suitable tools, they were close to the river and the soil was relatively soft, so digging was not difficult. After digging the deep pit, they found some thick bamboos, erected them one by one in the deep pit, filled it with some stones and soil, and then stepped on it to make it firm. In this way, by the afternoon, more than 10 bamboos were finally erected in the open space. Zhou Chuyu brought a few girls to the woods to cut vines. By the evening, they had finally cut a lot of vines. After cooking some wild boar meat and eating it, Zhou Chuyu stayed behind to keep watch, while several girls went to sleep early on the palm leaves. It was not until midnight when Song Yushi woke up to take his place on the watch that he lay down on the palm leaves and fell into a deep sleep. After waking up the next morning, everyone started to build the shelter without stopping. Since the pillars had been erected yesterday, today they used rattan and bamboo to connect all the pillars together. By the afternoon, the main frame of the shelter was finally built. All that remained was the roof and walls to be able to withstand attacks from large carnivores. Zhou Chuyu planned to build the walls of the shelter by stacking bamboos one by one. He was busy until the evening when he finally built one wall of the shelter with bamboos. After cooking some wild boar meat, Bai Ruolan stayed to keep watch while the others went to sleep early on the palm leaves. Unknowingly, they had been on this deserted island for more than 10 days. At this time, everyone no longer had much hope for the arrival of the rescue team. Chapter 22 Shelter construction completed. The next morning, after waking up, they went to the river to wash up briefly, and then continued to build the walls of the shelter. It took another day to finally build the 4 walls of the shelter, leaving room for a door. The only thing left was the roof. It seems that with another 2 days, the shelter can be completely built. These days, everyone has been building the shelter except for sleeping. Zhou Chuyu also brought back a wild boar that day, so they don't have to go to the woods to look for food every day. The girls were extremely exhausted these days. They felt like they had done all the physical work they had never done in their lives. Since the walls of the shelter had been built, they didn't have to keep watch tonight. They just lit a fire at the door. After waking up the next morning and cooking something to eat, everyone began to build the roof of the shelter. It took a whole day to finally build the roof of the shelter, and they also covered the roof with a thick layer of palm leaves. Another day passed like this, and Zhou Chuyu woke up at dawn the next morning. He glanced at the girl who was still sleeping, walked out of the shelter, went to the river, scooped up some river water to wash his face. He found a wooden stick and started digging the soil beside the creek. By the time the girls woke up, Zhou Chuyu had already dug out a large pile of soil. Seeing Zhou Chuyu digging mud by the river, several girls were curious. Ding Shui asked, "Brother Zhou, why are you digging so much soil?" Zhou Chuyu said without raising his head. "Although the shelter has been built, there are still some gaps in the roof and walls. I'm afraid it will leak when it rains, so I plan to mix some mud and smear it on the roof and walls." After hearing what he said, the girls finally understood and thought that he was more thoughtful. After washing up, the girls started digging the soil with him. It took more than an hour to finally dig up a large pile of soil. Zhou Chuyu and a few others found some leaves and dead grass and mixed them evenly in the soil. They added some water, took off their shoes and started to trample on it. I continued to step on it for more than an hour, then I grabbed a handful and took a look. I found that the mud had good cohesiveness, so I moved it to the shelter and started to smear it on the roof and walls. By the afternoon, a thick layer of mud had been applied on the walls and roof, and a bamboo door was installed for the shelter. It took a week to finally build the shelter. Since arriving on this deserted island, except for Zhou Chuyu and Ding Shui, the other girls have never changed their clothes or taken a bath. Now they all have a strange smell on their bodies, and their clothes are extremely dirty. Seeing that it was still a while before dark, Bai Ruolan said to Zhou Chuyu, "Brother Zhou, we want to take a bath in the creek. You see, we look like beggars now. It's a pity that we don't have a change of clothes. It would be great if we had a change of clothes." Hearing her say this, Zhou Chuyu suddenly remembered the uniforms he had hidden, and wondered what would happen if these girls wore them. Then he smiled and said, "Be careful when you take a shower. There might be poisonous snakes nearby. As for a change of clothes, I do have some, but I'm afraid you'd be embarrassed to wear them." Hearing him say this, several girls looked at him. Song Yushi said with some disbelief, "Brother Zhou, where are your spare clothes? You didn't take them off the corpse again?" Zhou Chuyu shook his head and said, "I hid the clothes on the beach. They were not taken from the bodies. I was just afraid that you would be embarrassed to wear them." Hearing him say this, Rui Yin quickly said, "Brother Zhou has clothes but you don't take them out and hide them on purpose. What kind of clothes are we embarrassed to wear?" Zhou Chuyu smiled. "Since you guys are willing to wear them, I'll go to the coast and get them tomorrow. I'll also go to the coast and boil some sea salt with seawater. I haven't eaten salt in so many days, and I feel weak all over. It's getting late, so if you guys want to take a shower, go now." Several people nodded, and Ding Shui said to him, "Brother Zhou, please don't peek when we are taking a bath." Zhou Chuyu glared at her and said, "Who do you think I am? Why would I peek at you? Even if I wanted to peek, I would have done it openly." Hearing him say this, the girls all laughed, walked towards the river, went to a secluded place, took off their clothes and pants, went into the river and started taking a bath. Zhou Chuyu took a piece of bamboo left over from building the shelter, picked up a knife and split it into pieces as wide as a finger. He planned to use these pieces to weave a bamboo basket, which would make it more convenient to carry things in the future. By the time he had split the bamboo into strips, several girls had returned from their bath. Although they were still wearing dirty clothes, they looked exceptionally beautiful after taking a bath. Zhou Chuyu couldn't help but take a few more glances at them. Several girls sat around the fire, drying their dripping hair. Seeing Zhou Chuyu fiddling with bamboo strips, Ding Shui asked curiously. Brother Zhu, what are you doing? Zhou Chuyu smiled. I want to use these bamboo strips to weave a bamboo basket. That way, it will be more convenient for us to carry things in the future. Bai Ruolan couldn't help but say. Brother Zhu, I feel like there's nothing you can't do. You're an all-round talent. How can someone as talented as you be a security guard on a cruise ship? Hearing her say this, Zhou Chuyu said with a smile. It's all for a living. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being a security guard. Although I don't make as much money as you anchors, I'm quite satisfied. After hearing what he said, Song Yushi asked him again. So what kind of wife do you want to find in the future? Zhou Chuyu said without thinking. It would be best to find someone rich, so that you don't have to struggle for the rest of your life, don't you think? Hearing what he said, the girls burst into laughter. It took Zhou Chuyu nearly 2 hours to weave a bamboo basket out of bamboo strips. Everyone returned to the shelter and lay down on the palm leaves to sleep. Zhou Chuyu felt very uncomfortable sleeping with several girls. He kept having all kinds of random thoughts in his mind. He thought that this was not a good way to go. He had to build a new shelter for himself when he had some free time. I kept thinking about this for a long time, and finally fell asleep in a daze around midnight. Chapter 23. Back to the coast. Perhaps it was because they were too tired during the past few days. Everyone didn't wake up until the sun was high in the sky the next morning. They went to the river to wash up, and Zhou Chuyu cooked the only remaining wild boar meat. After breakfast, Zhou Chuyu put the pot made from a paint bucket into a bamboo basket, put the basket on his back, asked a few people to tie up his sleeves and trouser legs, and then walked towards the coast with a few girls. Zhou Chuyu still led the way with a knife in hand, and the girls followed closely behind him. It took more than 2 hours to finally reach the coast, and they did not encounter any danger along the way. When they arrived at the shore, the girls all sat down on the ground, gasping for breath. Zhou Chuyu dug out some more coconuts, split them with a knife and shared them with the girls. After drinking the coconut juice, Zhou Chuyu found some firewood, took it to the beach and lit a fire. He then took a pot made of a paint bucket, filled it with sea water, placed it on the fire and began to boil sea salt. Several girls were playing on the coast. Zhou Chuyu found a wooden stick, sharpened one end of it with a knife, went to the rocks on the coast, took off his clothes and pants, went into the sea and started catching lobsters. It took more than 2 hours to finally catch more than 10 lobsters. I took the lobsters back to the fire, dug out some charcoal, put the lobsters directly on the charcoal and started grilling. The girls were tired from playing and returned to the fire. At this time, the sea water in the pot had evaporated, leaving a layer of grayish-white sea salt crystals at the bottom of the pot. These sea salt crystals still contained a lot of impurities and had to be further filtered and processed before they could be eaten. The boiled sea salt crystals were carefully placed in an empty bottle, which was then refilled with sea water and boiled again. Soon the grilled lobsters were ready. Several people picked up the lobsters, peeled off the shells, stuffed them into their mouths, and began to eat them in big mouthfuls. After eating lobster, it was almost dark. It was unlikely to go back today. It seemed that they could only stay on the coast for the night. Zhou Chuyu took a few people to the woods to chop some dry firewood and palm leaves and brought them back to the coast. At this time, Ding Shui suddenly said to Zhou Chuyu, Brother Zhu, where are the clothes you hid? Hurry up and get them. We are still waiting to change. Hearing her say this, Zhou Chuyu said with a smile. Are you sure you want to wear it? The girls all nodded, and Zhou Chuyu stood up and walked towards the place where the suitcase was hidden. It took an hour, and Zhou Chuyu came back carrying the suitcase. After taking the suitcases, the girls couldn't wait to open them. The moment the suitcases were opened, they all blushed. They didn't expect that the clothes Zhou Chuyu was talking about were these sexy uniforms. No wonder he asked if they wanted to wear them. Looking at the appearance of several people, Zhou Chuyu said with a smile. Do you guys still want to wear them now? After hearing his question, no one spoke. After a long while, Song Yushi blushed and said, Brother Zhu, where did you get these things? Zhou Chuyu said with a smile. Of course they were salvaged from the sea. Are you still wearing them now? After saying that, she looked at the few people with a smile. Ding Shui took a look at her extremely dirty clothes, gritted her teeth, picked up a set of uniform and walked into the woods. Seeing this, the other 3 girls also gritted their teeth, picked up a set of clothes and walked into the woods. Soon, a few girls changed their clothes and came out. The moment Zhou Chuyu saw them appear, his eyes widened immediately and he felt like his nose was about to bleed. These clothes showed off their sexy figures when worn by several people. When they saw Zhou Chuyu staring at them, several girls blushed. Song Yushi said shyly, "Brother Zhu, can you please stop looking at us? It feels weird when you look at us like this." Zhou Chuyu said with a smile, "I think you look really good in this dress. Why don't you wear it like this every day? It'll be a treat for my eyes, too." After he finished speaking, he burst into laughter. Several girls glared at him fiercely, took their changed clothes, ran to the shore and started washing them. After washing the clothes, I found a big tree on the coast and hung the washed clothes on the branches to dry. By this time, it had completely dark. The girls returned to the campfire in their sexy uniforms and sat down. Zhou Chuyu smoked a cigarette and looked at the girls with interest. Being looked at so unscrupulously by him, the girls felt extremely shy, but they couldn't do anything to him. They sat like this until very late and then lay down on the palm leaves to sleep. Zhou Chuyu sat by the fire, guarding the girls until dawn, when he felt his eyes could hardly be opened, so he lay down on the palm leaves to sleep. When the sun rose, several girls woke up. Seeing Zhou Chuyu was still sleeping, they did not disturb him. They walked to the shore, washed up, and prepared to change out of their sexy uniforms. At this moment, Ding Shui looked up and saw Liu Hainan and Ma Hu leading a few men towards this side. She hurriedly shouted to Song Yushi and the other two who were still washing up, "Look, Liu Hainan and the others are here." Hearing her shout, Song Yushi and the other two also raised their heads. At this time, Liu Hainan's group was only a few dozen meters away from them. They hurried back to the fire. Rui Ying squatted down and shook Zhou Chuyu, who was still sleeping, with her hand, and shouted to him, "Brother Zhu, something bad has happened. Liu Hainan and the others are here." Zhou Chuyu then opened his eyes, rubbed his sleepy eyes, and climbed up from the palm leaves. Being suddenly woken up by someone, Zhou Chuyu was immediately filled with anger. Looking at Liu Hainan and his group who were walking towards him, he wondered in his heart, what were these people doing here? Soon, Liu Hainan and his group came to Zhou Chuyu and his group. Seeing that the girls were wearing sexy uniforms, Liu Hainan and his group's eyes widened. Being stared at by such a large group of people, the girls all hid behind Zhou Chuyu. Zhou Chuyu said coldly to Liu Hainan, "What are you doing here? If you dare to look at me again, I will dig your eyeballs out." Hearing Zhou Chuyu say this, many people quickly retracted their gazes and lowered their heads. Only Liu Hainan and Ma Hu were still staring at the girls unscrupulously. Zhou Chuyu suddenly got angry and said loudly to Liu Hainan, "Are you too deaf? Or are your ears blocked by donkey hair? Why don't you get out of here? Wasn't the punishment I gave you last time enough?" After hearing Zhou Chuyu's words, Liu Hainan turned his gaze towards him and said with a smile, "Xiao Zhu, I've been looking for you for several days, and today I finally caught you. I advise you to be smart and hand over these girls to me so that I can have some fun with them. Then I might consider sparing your life." Hearing him say this, Zhou Chuyu couldn't help but burst out laughing, wondering what happened to Liu Hainan today. Did he take the wrong medicine, and dared to challenge him like this? Chapter 24, Grabbing a Gun with Bare Hands. Ma Hu continued, "Xiao Zhu, I advise you to be sensible. Just like my cousin said, hand these girls over to us, and we can consider sparing your life." Zhou Chuyu was immediately furious and shouted to the two of them, "I think you two have lost your minds. Or are you just itching for trouble? It seems like you didn't learn your lesson last time." After saying that, he was about to teach the two of them a lesson. At this time, Liu Hainan suddenly took out a pistol from his waist and pointed the gun at Zhou Chuyu. Zhou Chuyu was stunned when he saw Liu Hainan actually took out a pistol. Song Yushi and other girls were so scared that their faces turned pale and they screamed loudly. Liu Hainan said with a proud look on his face, "Xiao Zhu, show off again and let me see. No matter how good you are at fighting, can you beat the gun in my hand? As long as I pull the trigger, you will go to hell." Facing the black muzzle of the gun, Zhou Chuyu was not panicked at all. He had played with so many guns that he could hardly count them all. He just said to Liu Hainan, "Where did you get this pistol? You should know that in our country, the control of guns is relatively strict. Even the police can only carry guns when performing tasks." In response to his question, Liu Hainan did not hide anything and told him that the gun was found from a corpse. Liu Hainan said proudly to Song Yushi and the other girls, "You guys come here on your own, or come over after I kill Xiao Ju." Hearing him say this, Ding Shui quickly said, "As long as you don't kill Brother Ju, you can ask us to do anything." Song Yushi and the other two also said quickly, "As long as you spare Brother Ju, you can ask us to do anything." Hearing several girls say this, Liu Hainan burst into laughter and said, "Xiao Ju, I'm a little envious of you. I didn't expect these girls to be willing to sacrifice themselves for you." Zhou Chuyu did not speak, but was thinking about how to get the gun. Liu Hainan then said to Song Yushi and the other three, "If you want me to spare his life, that depends on what you do. As long as you serve me well, I can spare his life." Hearing him say this, several girls wanted to die, but for Zhou Chuyu they had no choice but to sacrifice themselves. At this time, Liu Hainan said loudly, "Take off your clothes first, so I can admire your bodies." After he finished speaking, he burst into laughter. Ma Hu and the others also laughed loudly. Hearing him say this, the girls felt more painful than killing themselves, and tears slowly flowed out. Seeing that they hadn't made any move, Liu Hainan said loudly again, "I'll count to 3. If you don't take off your clothes, I'll shoot him to death." After he finished speaking, he started counting. When he counted to 2, several girls reached out for their clothes. At this moment, Zhou Chuyu ran to Liu Hainan at lightning speed, grabbed his hand holding the gun, and snatched the gun from his hand before Liu Hainan could react. Turn the gun to Liu Hainan's head and say to him loudly, "You really deserve to die. It seems that I can't keep you here. When I was playing with the gun, you didn't even know where to play with the mud." Liu Hainan and his group were shocked by this sudden reversal. No one expected Zhou Chuyu to take the gun with his bare hands. Facing the black muzzle of the gun and Zhou Chuyu's murderous eyes, Liu Hainan fell to his knees and said to Zhou Chuyu, "Xiao Ju, not Boss Ju, I was just impulsive, please spare my life." Seeing this, Ma Hu and the others knelt on the ground, begging Zhou Chuyu to spare their lives. Seeing that Liu Hainan had already snatched the gun, Song Yushi and the other girls breathed a sigh of relief. Song Yushi walked quickly up to Liu Hainan, raised her hand and slapped him hard on the face several times. With Zhou Chuyu pointing a gun at his head, Liu Hainan dared not resist, not even to move. Ding Shui walked up to Ma Hu and slapped him more than 10 times in a row, making his face look like a pig's head. After the slaps, Ding Shui still felt a little unsatisfied, so she kicked him hard in the stomach. Bai Ruolan and Rui Ying also walked up to Liu Hainan and Ma Hu and slapped them a few times. At this time, Liu Hainan said to Zhou Chuyu like a dog, "Boss Ju, can you please let us go? I promise I will never mess with you again." Seeing him like this, Zhou Chuyu was thinking about whether he should just beat him to death. But if he killed him like this, it would be a bit unreasonable. If he left here one day and others found out, he would most likely face jail time. If it were in the past, I would have shot without hesitation, but now I have a seriously ill mother who needs my care. If I go to jail, what will happen to my elderly mother? Even if I want to kill him, I can't do it in front of so many people. It seems I have to find another opportunity later. Thinking of this, he slowly put away the gun and said to him coldly, "Stand up." Liu Hainan and his group thought that Zhou Chuyu had spared them, so they stood up one after another. However, as soon as Liu Hainan stood up, Zhou Chuyu kicked him hard in the vitals with all his strength. After this kick, Liu Hainan immediately fell to the ground, holding his crotch, and screamed like a pig being slaughtered. It seemed that Liu Hainan could no longer be considered a real man. Ma Hu and his companions felt a chill on their backs when they saw Zhou Chuyu being so cruel. Zhou Chuyu walked up to Ma Hu again and looked at this killer. Ma Hu knelt on the ground and begged continuously. Seeing this, the others also knelt on the ground. At this time Zhou Chuyu said to them coldly, "Why don't you get out of here quickly? If you come to trouble me again in the future, I will kill you." After hearing what he said, Ma Hu and the others thanked him again, then they helped Liu Hainan, who was still wailing, and left in a hurry. Seeing them leave, Bai Ruolan said to him, "Brother Zhu, are you just going to let them go like this?" Zhou Chuyu said with a wry smile, "I can't just kill them all." After saying that, he picked up the pistol and began to examine it. It was a Type 54 pistol. After removing the magazine, he found that there were still 6 bullets in it. Suddenly, I was delighted that I could survive well here with this pistol. At the same time, I began to wonder who the owner of this pistol was. He put the pistol on his waist and lay down on the palm leaves again. Song Yushi and the other girls went into the woods to change their clothes. Zhou Chuyu didn't wake up until noon. He climbed up from the palm leaves and saw several girls playing on the shore. He went to the shore to wash his face, walked to the reef, took off his clothes and pants, took a sharpened wooden stick, went into the sea and started catching lobsters. Chapter 25 Cold Ice. In this way, he spent more than an hour catching more than 10 lobsters, put on his clothes, took the lobsters to the fire and started roasting them. From yesterday to now, 4 or 5 bottles of sea salt crystals have been boiled using sea water. After processing, these sea salts are enough for several people to eat for a while. Zhou Chuyu plans to return to the shelter after eating the grilled lobster. After the lobsters were grilled, several people took the lobsters, peeled off the shells, stuffed them into their mouths and started eating. At this moment, Bai Ruolan suddenly saw a woman walking towards them from the sea in the distance. He quickly said to everyone, "Look, there's a woman over there, she looks pretty." After hearing her say this, everyone turned their eyes to the coast. At this time, the woman also saw the few people, quickened her pace and walked towards them quickly. Soon the girl came up to the group. Only then did Zhou Chuyu and the others see the woman's appearance clearly. The woman should be about 24 or 25 years old, about 1.7 meters tall, and quite pretty, but she looked very cold. She was wearing a tattered sportswear. It was the first time that everyone saw this girl after being on this deserted island for so long. When the girl saw the grilled lobsters, she couldn't help but swallow her saliva. Without saying a word, she picked up one, peeled off the shell, stuffed it into her mouth, and began to eat it voraciously. Everyone was confused by his operation. Song Yu said, "How can you be so rude? You just take our food and eat it." The girl remained cold and silent, eating the lobster by herself. After finishing one, she rubbed her hands, took out an ID from her tattered pocket and threw it directly into Zhou Chuyu's hand, then picked up another lobster, peeled off the shell and started eating. Zhou Chuyu picked up the certificate she threw to him, and before he opened it, he saw a national emblem on the cover that was extremely conspicuous. Below the national emblem were several large golden characters, Ministry of National Security. When he opened it, he saw the girl's photo, name and position. The girl's name was Ling Bing, and her position was not low. Zhou Chuyu couldn't help but wonder why someone from the Ministry of State Security would appear here. Zhou Chuyu then showed her ID to Song Yushi and the other girls. Several girls were also shocked after watching it. They had only heard of the Ministry of State Security before and knew it was a relatively mysterious department. They did not expect that the girl was actually from the Ministry of State Security. This cold girl was just eating the grilled lobsters, one after another. Zhou Chuyu and others did not stop her. After eating for lobsters, the girl took her ID from Ding Shui and put it back in her pocket. She said "thank you" coldly to them, stood up and wanted to leave. When she stood up, she was suddenly stunned when she saw the pistol on Zhou Chuyu's waist. She quickly stretched out a hand to grab the pistol. When her hand was about to touch the pistol, Zhou Chuyu also quickly stretched out a hand and grabbed her arm. Ling Bing also reacted quickly. When Zhou Chuyu grabbed her arm, she quickly broke free. Both of them were stunned. They didn't expect that the other's skills were so good. Ling Bing's attempt to snatch the pistol just now was as fast as lightning, but he didn't expect that Zhou Chuyu would catch it so easily. Zhou Chuyu also grabbed his arm quickly just now, but he didn't expect that she would break free. At this time, Ling Bing slowly spoke. "Who are you? How did Xiao Li's pistol end up in your hands?" Hearing her ask this, Zhou Chuyu said with a smile, "I'm just a security guard. You can tell by the clothes I'm wearing. And I don't know who the Xiao Li you mentioned is. I stole this gun from a bad guy. If you don't believe me, ask them." Hearing him say this, Ling Bing said, "You farted." After saying that, he kicked Zhou Chuyu hard. Zhou Chuyu reacted quickly and easily dodged Ling Bing's kick. Zhou Chuyu also quickly stood up from the ground. Ling Bing launched another set of lightning-fast attacks at Zhou Chuyu, but they were all easily resolved by Zhou Chuyu. Only then did Ling Bing realize that he had met a master, and he began to become more curious about Zhou Chuyu's identity. You have to know that he is one of the best masters in the security department. Most people can't resist his series of moves. Unexpectedly, Zhou Chuyu resolved them so easily. At this time Zhou Chuyu immediately retreated 2 meters away and said to Ling Bing, "I say, you are unreasonable, woman. You're hitting me before I've even finished talking. If you keep doing this, I won't be polite. But Ling Bing didn't listen at all and said coldly, I want to see why you are so rude. After she finished speaking, she attacked Zhou Chuyu again as fast as lightning. Zhou Chuyu thought that he had to subdue this crazy woman as soon as possible. When she attacked him, Zhou Chuyu did not dodge, but blasted out a circle as fast as lightning. Ling Bing hurriedly withdrew his move to block, but Zhou Chuyu's circle was too powerful. Ling Bing only felt a huge force coming towards him. Although he had stretched out his hand to block it, he still took 2 steps back and sat on the ground. Ling Bing wanted to stand up and fight, but Zhou Chuyu quickly said to her, Don't bother wasting your energy. You are no match for me. If you have anything to say, why don't you just talk it out nicely? There is no need to resort to violence. Hearing him say this, Ling Bing said to him again, Who are you? Zhou Chuyu said with a wry smile. Didn't I tell you? I'm just a security guard. Yushi and a few others quickly told Ling Bing that Zhou Chuyu was a security guard on the cruise ship. After hearing what the girls said, she believed that Zhou Chuyu was a security guard. But how could a security guard have such amazing skills? Perhaps even her instructor was not as good as him. Ling Bing then asked, Then where did you get the pistol on your waist? Zhou Chuyu said to her again, Did I just tell you? I stole it from a bad guy. If you don't believe me, you can ask them. Yushi and others told her again what happened in the morning. Only then did she realize that she had misunderstood Zhou Chuyu. When she learned that the pistol was picked up by Liu Hainan from the corpse, she felt sad again. After a while, Ling Bing said to Zhou Chuyu, How can a security guard like you have such amazing skills? I feel like you're even better than my instructor. Hearing her ask this, Zhou Chuyu smiled and said, I was in the army for a few years. By the way, who was your instructor? Hearing Zhou Chuyu say this, Ling Bing said expressionlessly, My instructor's name is Zhao Long, and you wouldn't know him even if I told you. Hearing her say this, Zhou Chuyu couldn't help but smile and said, It's little fatty dragon. I didn't expect this guy to be your instructor. It seems like he's doing pretty well. Chapter 26 Dragon Head. Hearing Zhou Chuyu say this, Ling Bing's face was full of shock, and he said to Zhou Chuyu, Who are you? How do you know my instructor? Zhou Chuyu then smiled and said, My name is Zhou Chuyu. Hearing Zhou Chuyu say his name, Ling Bing was stunned again, and then he said tremblingly, You are the leader. Zhou Chuyu smiled bitterly and nodded. It's been a long time since anyone called me by this name. I've been away from the army for a long time. Hearing Zhou Chuyu say this, Ling Bing quickly smiled and said, You are legend in the special forces. Even our instructors are full of admiration when they talk about you. I have always dreamed of becoming someone like you, but I didn't expect to meet you here. Zhou Chuyu smiled again and said, I'm just an ordinary security guard now. By the way, why are you here? Ling Bing then started talking to Zhou Chuyu. It turned out that she and Xiao Li were tracking a foreign spy on a cruise ship. She was separated from Xiao Li after the cruise ship crashed and drifted here with a lifebuoy. Since she was on the other side of this deserted island, she had not seen Zhou Chuyu and Liu Hainan and the others these days. These days she has been picking up some clams and grilling them on the coast. This morning she was planning to find something to eat on the coast, but when she saw smoke rising here, she walked along the coast. Hearing her say this, Zhou Chuyu nodded, then took out a coconut, split it open and handed it to her. Perhaps because she was really too thirsty, Ling Bing took the coconut, tilted her head back and drank up all the coconut juice inside. At this time Zhou Chuyu said to her, Would you like to come with me to the shelter? Hearing Zhou Chuyu say this, Ling Bing said with curiosity, You still have a shelter? Zhou Chuyu nodded, and Ling Bing quickly said to him, Then I'll go back with you. Zhou Chuyu then carried the bamboo basket on his back and buried the fire with sand. He then went to the place where the coconuts were hidden, dug some coconuts and put them in the bamboo basket, and then led a group of girls towards the shelter. Along the way, Zhou Chuyu led the way with a knife in his hand. Yushi and several girls followed closely behind him, and Ling Bing walked at the end. It took more than 2 hours for everyone to return to the shelter safely. Looking at the shelter built by Zhou Chuyu and his men, Ling Bing couldn't help but say to Zhou Chuyu, I didn't expect you to be so capable and build such a solid shelter. You are worthy of being the leader. Zhou Chuyu said with a smile. I'm no longer the leader, you can still call me by my name, or call me Brother Zhu. Hearing him say this, Ling Bing nodded quickly. After hearing the conversation between the two, Song Yushi and the others became more curious about Zhou Chuyu's identity, and they admired him more and more. There was no food left in the shelter. Seeing that it was still dark, Zhou Chuyu planned to go into the woods to find some food. He then asked the girls to stay in the shelter and not run around, while he himself planned to go out to look for food. At this time, Ling Bing suddenly said to him, "I'll go with you." Zhou Chuyu did not refuse. He took out the pistol from his waist and handed it to her, asking her to use it for self-defense. He then took a knife. The two of them walked towards the woods. Seeing them leave, Song Yushi spoke. "Who exactly is Brother Zhu? Why does even Ling Bing from the National Security Bureau respect him so much?" Hearing her say this, Bai Ruolan and the other two shook their heads. They didn't know who Zhou Chuyu was, but they felt that Zhou Chuyu was not simple. Zhou Chuyu and Ling Bing were walking in the woods. They had been walking for nearly an hour when suddenly a noise came from the woods not far away. The two of them slowly walked towards the bushes. Before the two men got close, two big grey rabbits suddenly jumped out from the bushes. Zhou Chuyu immediately threw the knife in his hand away. At this time, he was still 7 or 8 meters away from the rabbits, and the rabbits were still running. Zhou Chuyu swung the knife and accurately stabbed a hare's body. The hare instantly fell to the ground, rolling over and over, screaming in pain. The other hare ran away without a trace. Seeing Zhou Chuyu get the hare so easily, Ling Bing said with great admiration, "I didn't expect you to be so good. Please teach me when you have time." Zhou Chuyu smiled. "I am just a blind cat that has caught a dead mouse." After saying that, he quickly walked up to the fallen hare, grabbed it, pulled out the knife, and cut its neck hard again. The hare kicked its legs a few times and died completely. Seeing that it was getting late, the two men did not continue searching and walked towards the shelter with the rabbit. When they returned to the shelter, the sun had completely set. Ling Bing took the knife and the hare to the river and started to process it. Seeing her skillfully processing the hare, Zhou Chuyu couldn't help but smile. With her joining, everyone can survive better here. Soon Ling Bing processed the rabbit, took it back to the fire, found a wooden stick to string it up, put it on the fire and started roasting it. When Ling Bing saw the various supplies that Zhou Chuyu had exchanged in the shelter, he was surprised again and admired Zhou Chuyu more and more. Although she looks rather aloof and hardly speaks, she has great respect for Zhou Chuyu and almost regards him as her idol. After the hare was roasted, several people sat around and ate it. After eating the roasted hare, everyone returned to the shelter early and lay down on the palm leaves to sleep. Zhou Chuyu woke up at dawn the next morning. He climbed up from the palm leaves and saw that the bamboo door of the shelter was open. He glanced around and realized that Ling Bing was not in the shelter. When he walked out of the shelter, he saw Ling Bing practicing boxing by the river. Zhou Chuyu watched with great interest. After watching for a while, he went to the river to wash up. Seeing him coming to the creek, Ling Bing immediately attacked him, but Zhou Chuyu easily dodged each attack. Before the two had even fought for a while, Ling Bing was clearly at a disadvantage, and this was when Zhou Chuyu didn't use his full strength. If Zhou Chuyu used all his strength, Ling Bing might have been knocked to the ground by Zhou Chuyu long ago. At this moment, Zhou Chuyu seized the opportunity and knocked Ling Bing to the ground directly. Then he smiled and pointed out her flaws, then went to the river to wash up. Ling Bing recalled what Zhou Chuyu had just said to her, and immediately said to him happily, "Thank you for your advice, Long Chu." Zhou Chuyu said with a smile, "You should just call me Brother Zhu." Hearing him say this, Ling Bing nodded quickly. Chapter 27: Shooting the Wild Boar. After washing up, Zhou Chuyu went to the woods to look for food again. Seeing this, Ling Bing hurriedly followed him. The two of them walked in the woods for a long distance. They saw quite a few pheasants and squirrels, but they were all on trees more than 10 meters high. Although Ling Bing had a pistol in his hand, it would not be worth it to waste bullets on pheasants. Zhou Chuyu was thinking about making a few bows and arrows as soon as possible. He walked forward for a while and suddenly heard the howling of wild boars in the woods in the distance. The two men looked at each other and walked quickly towards the direction where the wild boars were making their calls. After walking a few hundred meters, they saw 4 or 5 wild boars leisurely grazing on the grass in the woods in the distance. These are some relatively large wild boars, each weighing nearly 200 kilograms. Zhou Chuyu knows that adult wild boars are more ferocious than wolves, although both he and Ling Bing are relatively skilled. However, the two men were not sure if they could deal with such a big wild boar with their bare hands. At this time, they were only more than 100 meters away from the wild boar. Zhou Chuyu whispered to Ling Bing. "Give me the pistol, I'm going to take care of a wild boar." Hearing him say this, Ling Bing smiled and said, "I'll go." After saying that, she took out the gun from her waist, turned on the safety and walked towards the wild boars. Seeing this, Zhou Chuyu could only stand there and watch her. Soon Ling Bing was less than 50 meters away from the wild boars. He raised his pistol with both hands, aimed at the largest wild boar, and decisively pulled the trigger. With just a single gunshot, the bullet she fired hit the wild boar's head directly. The wild boar ran forward 3 or 4 meters and then fell straight to the ground, rolling over and over, screaming in pain. When the other wild boars saw their companion fall to the ground, they also fled in all directions and disappeared without a trace in a short while. Seeing that Ling Bing had hit the wild boar, Zhou Chuyu also ran over quickly. When the two of them ran to the wild boar, they saw that although the wild boar was shot in the head, it was still rolling around. Zhou Chuyu immediately picked up the knife and stabbed it hard into the wild boar's neck. The moment he pulled out the knife, a stream of blood gushed out from the wild boar's neck. Zhou Chuyu didn't have time to dodge, and his body was covered with wild boar's blood. As the blood continued to flow out, the wild boar gradually became motionless and soon died completely. In order to prevent the smell of blood from attracting other large carnivores, Zhou Chuyu immediately took a knife and cut some vines, tied up the wild boars for legs, and cut a wooden stick through the wild boar's legs. Then he and Ling Bing carried the wild boar one after another and walked towards the shelter. But this wild boar weighs at least 200 kilograms, and the weight shared on each person's shoulders is more than 100 kilograms. In addition, the road in the woods is not easy to walk on, so the two people have to stop and rest for a while after walking a short distance. They kept walking and stopping like this for nearly 3 hours before they finally carried the wild boar to the shelter, panting and sweating. At this time, Yushi and others were waiting anxiously at the door of the shelter. Since waking up, we haven't seen Zhou Chuyu and Ling Bing. Several hours have passed and they haven't come back yet. Everyone was extremely worried, but when they saw the two of them appear, the girls finally relaxed. When the boys saw that the two men actually carried back such a big wild boar, they were extremely shocked. Zhou Chuyu and the other man carried the wild boar to the riverside, put it on the ground, and then they collapsed on the ground and gasped for breath. Yushi immediately ran back to the shelter, split 2 coconuts with an axe, and took them to the river to hand them to the two people. After taking the coconuts handed by Yushi, the two of them tilted their heads back and began to drink the coconut juice inside. The girls had seen Zhou Chuyu dealing with a wild boar last time, so they quickly went to the woods, found some dry grass, carried it to the riverside, and spread it on the wild boar's body. After drinking coconut juice and resting for a while, Zhou Chuyu and the other man recovered some strength. Zhou Chuyu took out a lighter from his pocket and lit the dry grass. The smell of burnt pig hair instantly floated in the air. Several people also covered their mouths and noses and stood far away. After the dry grass was burned out, the hair on the wild boar was also burned clean. Then several people took bamboo tubes to draw water from the river to clean the wild boar. Zhou Chuyu took out a knife and cut a hole in the wild boar's belly. He took out the internal organs and put them aside. Then he picked up the knife and started cutting up the wild boar meat. In less than half an hour, the wild boar meat was cut up and taken to the palm leaves outside the shelter. As for the internal organs, only the liver was left, and the other parts were thrown into the river and left to be washed away by the water. Zhou Chuyu took some wild boar ribs, chopped them into small pieces, put them in the pot and started stewing them. While the wild boar ribs were stewing, he put the remaining wild boar meat on a bamboo rack and started smoking it. By the time the wild boar ribs were cooked, it was already afternoon. The few people were so hungry that they picked up their bowls and chopsticks, picked up the ribs in the pot, and began to eat them voraciously. A large pot of wild boar ribs was eaten up by several people in a short time, and in the end there was not even a drop of soup left. After dinner, Zhou Chuyu asked Ling Bing to take Yushi and several other girls to build bamboo beds in the shelter, while he went to the river with the sea salt crystals he brought back from the coast. He cut some bamboo tubes as thick as a bowl and took them to the river. He filled the tubes with water and placed the sea salt crystals in each of them. Then he took a bamboo tube, used a knife to dig a small hole in the bottom of the tube, then went to the fire and got some charcoal, went to the river and dug out some sand, first put some charcoal into the bamboo tube, and then put a layer of sand in. He put a layer of charcoal and sand into the bamboo tube, and did not stop until it reached the top of the tube. In this way, he made a simple filter. He took some more firewood and lit a fire by the river. He then took the pot made of paint bucket to the river. At this time, the sea salt crystals in the bamboo tube had completely dissolved in the water. Pour the brine in the bamboo tube into a bamboo tube filled with sand and charcoal. The brine will be filtered by the sand and charcoal and flow out through the small hole at the bottom of the bamboo tube. Zhou Chuyu used a pot made of a paint bucket to collect the flowing salt water until the pot was full. Then he put the pot full of salt water on the fire to boil it.